Hello, boring people. Tonight we drift into the misty, strange waters of ancient Mexico, where the ground wobbles, the gardens float, and the food somehow grows without a solid inch of soil underneath. It's not a fantasy, unless you count waking up at 3 a.m. craving tacos. You're about to travel back to a time when brilliant Aztec gardeners figured out how to feed an empire using nothing but mud, reeds, and stubborn genius. But don't get too comfy. These floating farms weren't all soft petals and sunny cornfields. The lake was cold, the mosquitoes had ambitions, and if you leaned the wrong way on a chinampa, well, you probably wouldn't survive this. So before you jump into this boring and sleepy story, please take a moment to like my videos and subscribe to my channel, but only if you actually enjoy and feel comfortable with the stories I tell here. And hey, post your location and what time it is for you right now. I love knowing where everyone's falling asleep from. Now lie down and relax, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's start our boring journey together tonight. The air is cold. Damp fog curls around your ankles. You stand at the edge of Lake Texcoco, the heart of the Valley of Mexico, sometime around the year 1325. The city behind you, Tenochtitlan, is only just starting to rise from the lake like a jagged obsidian tooth. And ahead is something that looks like it floated out of a fever dream. Rafts. So many rafts, but not like the kind you'd expect pirates to be yelling from. These are wide, flat, low, and covered with crops. Cornstalks, beans curling around sticks, fat squash vines drooping over the sides into the water. Birds hop between them, and sometimes... Wait, did that one just wink at you? Your canoe glides between these strange green islands. The air smells of wet leaves, a touch of wood smoke, and something rich and earthy that might be either fertile mud or someone's long-forgotten sock. You pass a man kneeling on one raft, carefully rearranging flowers in rows that could win awards at a modern florist. He hums, not noticing you. Or maybe he does, but you're invisible here. Your guide, a teenage boy with blue paint smeared across his cheeks and a jaguar tooth necklace bouncing on his chest, doesn't say much. He just paddles. His name, he finally tells you, is Tochtli. It means rabbit. You try not to smile. He doesn't. The chinampas, those floating gardens, are his world. His ancestors built them. His future depends on them. And he's taking you to the very beginning. He lands the canoe by a cluster of rafts that seem older, more hand-woven and fragile, the kind your modern brain would call unregulated. Here you see the beginnings of everything. A team of gardeners, call them inventors really, bend over reed mats that float just under the surface. These are the earliest chinampa foundations, layers of reeds tied together, then weighted with stone and smeared with mud so thick it plops like cake batter. Tochtli points. First they float, then they feed. You're not sure if he's joking. The gardeners certainly aren't. They layer lake mud, clay, decomposing plant matter, and some sort of duck poop smelling compost into a rectangle shape. You watch one of them hurl a glob straight from the lake bed with his bare hands, singing something low and rhythmic. Another whistles back, and you realize the tune is keeping time, some ancient gardening metronome. Quirky fact for the night, some chinampa builders believed humming certain melodies would calm the water spirits. Whether that's superstition or just great workplace culture is up to you. Now you're stepping onto one of these finished rafts. It shifts under your feet. Not dangerously, but enough to remind you this isn't Kansas, or even Tenochtitlan. The soil here is warm, moist, and somehow always renewing itself. That's the secret. These chinampas are alive. The roots of the plants dig down into rich black compost. The water seeps up naturally, meaning no irrigation system is needed, and thanks to the narrow canals between each raft, Every spot is reachable by canoe. Efficient, weird, and kind of genius. Historians still argue whether chinampas floated entirely or were built atop lakebed posts that eventually reached solid-ish ground. It's one of those facts that's slippery, like trying to stand on a log in a lazy river. And of course, no one thought to invent GoPros or city permits back then. So we just guess. But you're here. You feel it. The way these floating gardens sway but hold firm. The way the plants thrive, even though they've technically got one foot in the drink. You watch a farmer in a woven straw hat stoop over rows of tomato plants. Yes, tomatoes, which, by the way, are native to Mesoamerica, so next time someone says Italian food, you can gently remind them who invented marinara. Another farmer waves at you, laughing as he pulls up a fistful of glossy green chilies. Your nose twitches at the spice. Somewhere nearby, a heron flaps noisily, unimpressed, and then tactfully tugs your arm. He points to the skyline, a jagged ripple of temples and early market stalls across the water. That, he whispers, is who we feed. This isn't some backyard hobby. These chinampas feed the capital, all of it. Tens of thousands of people rely on floating mud islands, farmed by people like Toxtli and his duck poop slinging uncles. You sit on the edge of the raft. The water laps gently. Somewhere someone's playing a clay flute, high and lilting. You realize you've barely heard any wheels or hooves, just paddles and birds and the occasional grunt of a guy dragging a basket of squash twice his size. The city grows, and the gardens float. But for how long? Toxtli refuses to let you sink into lotus-eating laziness. One sharp tug on your sleeve, and you're wobbling back into the canoe. The cracked cedar kind that creaks like a complaints department in need of coffee. We need stronger earth, he mutters, as though the sponge cake soil under your feet an hour ago wasn't gourmet enough. Off you glide, prow cutting the reed curtains while you balance like a reluctant flamingo practicing paddleboard yoga. The farther from the chinampa maze you drift, the stranger the water tastes. A scout crouches, scoops a handful, sips, winces, then spits with theatrical flair. Lake Texcoco is complicated, fresh where snowmelt rivers gush in, briny where there's nowhere for the water to escape. Mainstream fact number one. The Mexica know the invisible map by palate alone. You learn quickly that too salty here means burn a hole through your tongue. You try anyway, regretting it in precisely 3 heartbeats. The canoe noses against a marshy shore pocked with wiry grass and the occasional bleached fish bone the size of a letter opener. 6 scouts hop out. Their gold nose rings flash, but everything else is mud brown from hairline to sandal thong. Each wields a digging stick worn smooth by generations of calluses. Shovel, spear, and percussion instrument all in one. You follow, feet squelching into ground that feels springy, almost alive. A warm wind rolls across the flatland, lifting tan dust in lazy spirals. Free exfoliation, you joke silently while the scouts mutter quick prayers to Ehecatl, the wind god who loves scattering picnic lunches. Quirky tidbit on the breeze. Some gardeners smear chili paste on reed wind chimes, hoping the spicy aroma distracts Ehecatl. Whether that's theology or ancient air freshener is anyone's guess. The team fans out, performing what looks like an avant-garde dance. One kneels, pinches soil, rubs it between fingers, and inhales with the seriousness of a Paris perfumer. Hints of willow rot, undertones of duck feather, he announces. Another chews a clay pebble and declares, too gritty, needs more silt. Feeling bold, you mimic the tasting routine and very nearly invent the spit take. That chew has all the charm of an overpriced hipster cacao nib, earthy, bitter, and definitely not worth 5 shells. They're hunting dirt that clings when squeezed, yet crumbles politely when tapped, rich, airy, forever moist. Too sandy and the wind will slurp it away, too dense and seedlings suffocate. When a perfect patch reveals itself, the scouts holler triumphantly, scoop dusk black muck into reed baskets, and crown each heap with a tuft of marsh grass as a handle. Every basket soon bulges like a bread loaf fresh from the comal. Congratulations, this is your new gym. 100 pounds of goo that slops down your tunic whenever you shift. As you trudge behind them, sandals making suction noises fit for a slapstick sketch, one scout laughs and promises you're earning chinampa calves, the Valley of Mexico's version of leg day. Joke number 1 lands, lightly splashing your dignity. Halfway back to the canoe, the eldest scout, a wiry woman with braided gray hair, stops beside a patch of cracked, powder-dry ground. Once fertile, she sighs, nudging the brittle crust with her toe, but the lake breathes in and out. When it pulls back, the wind steals our topsoil. You glimpse the wider threat. Hungry breezes scour cropland, forcing farmers to chase fertility like toddlers chasing soap bubbles. Historians still argue whether this environmental seesaw was the true spark behind floating farms or merely the last straw after decades of political squabbles and overcrowded shorelines. The debate, like the mud, remains gloriously sticky. By midday, the baskets form a pyramid in the canoe, mud oozing between fibers. You collapse onto the gunwale, trying to look heroic while secretly praying for snacks. Instead, a scout hands you a lump of something greenish. Eat. You brace for doom, but it's sweet. Roasted maguey sap mixed with amaranth grains and licked by vanilla orchid. Joke number 2 flies out of your mouth. So basically, the valley's first energy bar? The scout chuckles. If the gods wanted endorsements, they'd stamp their symbols on every cactus. The return trip becomes a relay. At each narrow canal, 2 scouts vault onto a chinampa, ferrying baskets across the wobbling surface to staging zones where master gardeners wait. You tag along, nearly tipping the canoe once, but a quick grab of a willow branch saves both you and your fashionable humiliation. Remember that winking heron from earlier? He's perched on a pole nearby, delivering avian side-eye with Oscar-level disdain. On a larger chinampa, more mini-island than raft, Tockley dumps the final baskets into a low pit. Gardeners rake shredded lake weed and gray ash over the silky muck. Feeds the earth so the earth feeds us, one explains. Mainstream science translation, they're preloading their soil with nitrogen and micronutrients long before anyone coins the term crop rotation. Next, a gardener sprinkles a dramatic pinch of ground cacao over the pile for the god's sweet tooth. Quirky, yes, but it smells divine. Before you can steal a taste, Tockley claps mud from his hands and gestures to bundles of fresh-cut reeds stacked nearby. Tomorrow we weave, he says. Bring gloves, or grow calluses fast. Joke number 3 lands when another gardener brandishes his biceps and calls reed weaving the CrossFit of 1325. Dusk slips in like a silk scarf. The wind calms, and the lake mirrors volcano silhouettes in molten rose glass. A lone eagle circles overhead, an omen the Mexica track obsessively. Does it hover thicker tonight, wings dipping in approval? Historians still argue whether the legendary eagle on a cactus appeared exactly here or near the future main plaza of Tenochtitlan. For now, it's just you, a cooling sky and chinampas breathing between. Torches flare along canal banks, each flame a marker so late-coming canoes don't plow into sleeping gardens. You step onto a raft designated as visitor quarters. It rocks gently, a cradle with cricket accompaniment. Somewhere, a clay flute repeats the same lullaby that guided you through dawn, music for seedlings and sore shoulders alike. You lie back, muscles humming. Tomorrow you'll twist reeds, bend saplings, and wrestle the lake into submission. But tonight the wind rests, the dust settles, and the muddy treasure you hauled glows softly under torchlight like midnight chocolate pudding, minus the sugar, plus the pungency. Sleep crawls over you like a stealthy jaguar kitten, stealing tension first, thoughts second, leaving only the steady splash of paddles somewhere far down canal. Morning splashes silver on your eyelids, and before you can bargain for 5 more minutes, Tockley's reed sandal toe nudges your ribs. Up. The lake's still asleep. We steal its stillness for weaving. You groan something half polite, half prehistoric, then wobble across dew-slick planks toward the work site. Somewhere a heron, the same judgmental diva from yesterday, croaks a laugh that sounds suspiciously like rise and grind. On a broad, empty raft, the elders have arranged piles of emerald-striped cattails, they call them tulle, in neat fans, tips pointing outward like sunbeams. Each stalk is thick as your thumb, hollow and faintly pepper-scented from the night's chili smoke pest ward. You kneel, knees squeaking. Yesterday's mud is now artisanal knee armor, and watch the choreography begin. First comes the warp. Long reeds laid side by side, lined up with the precision of obsidian blades at market. Younger helpers slosh buckets of lake water over them so the stalks stay supple. One elder, skin creased deeper than a baked squash, grunts for silence. Today's classroom has no chalkboards, just fast fingers and absolute focus. Grab, bend, tuck, Tockley whispers, demonstrating. You imitate, lacing cross reeds through the warp at a 45-degree slant. The trick is rhythmic. Left hand feeds, right hand tightens, foot presses, then you scoot 8 inches and repeat. After 5 minutes, your wrists feel like they're being politely chewed by piranhas. Joke number 1 escapes. Who needs gym memberships when you have cattail Pilates? An elder's eyebrow flicks, humor acknowledged, productivity expected. Mainstream historical fact slides in with the morning breeze. These mats aren't random picnic blankets. They're proto-foundations, petluddle, designed roughly 5 paces wide and 20 paces long, so they fit neatly between willow anchors later on. Archaeologists measuring surviving chinampa plots still clock that classic 2.5 by 30 meter rhythm in modern Xochimilco canals. Some building traditions age like fine pulque. When the weaving reaches half-mat size, a helper sprinkles fine volcanic ash into the gaps. Quirky tidbit, seasoned gardeners claim the ash scares away reed-boring beetles that love midnight munchies. Others insist it's just the valley's version of glitter. Everything looks prettier with a dusting of apocalypse gray. You refrain from testing the flavor. The mat grows, each row a stubborn argument with the lake's eventual push and pull. Elders periodically test tension by bouncing, yes, literally hopping on the edges. If the weave holds their weight plus a full basket of mud, it graduates. One elder summons you to the corner. She presses your palm flat on the reeds and hums a note that vibrates through the mat into your bones. Hear that? She asks. You nod, though you mostly feel it. A low, satisfying thrum like plucked bass strings. That resonance, she explains, signals even tension throughout the weave. Ancient engineering meets garage band acoustics. Once the mat is certified wiggle-proof, 2 younger gardeners drag over barrels of sludge, the silky black treasure scouted yesterday. They tip one. Mud cascades in slow motion, smelling of wet coffee grounds and pond perfume. Immediately, hands begin slapping it across the mat, building a gooey layer 1 thumb deep. Picture frosting a colossal sheet cake, except the frosting is alive with microorganisms and you really shouldn't lick the spatula. Here the lake's lullaby shifts to percussion. Slop, pat, sweep, slap. You join, palms sinking into warmth. Mud squeezes between fingers, oozing toward wrist bones like mischievous cats. Every few strokes, someone tosses chopped water weed, shell grit, and shredded maize stalks into the mix. Slow-release fertilizer long before agrochemistry textbooks. You can't resist joke number 2. Organic, non-GMO, lake to table, just needs a hipster branding sticker. Tockley snorts, then flicks mud at your nose for insolence. Large baskets filled with river sand come next, broadcast lightly over the surface for drainage. The elders work with quiet urgency. The mat must be seeded with dirt while still floating loose. Wait too long and the weight will sink the edges prematurely. Historians still argue whether these earliest chinampas began as true free-floating islands later tethered, or whether builders immediately staked them to the shallow lake bed. Core samples suggest both stories hide kernels of truth, a messy origin that matches the mud now streaking your cheeks. With the sand settled, 4 reed ropes, each plaited thicker than your forearm, snake out across the water. Swimmers dive, carrying rope ends beneath adjacent finished chinampas. Somewhere below, stone anchors wrapped in netting wait to bite lakebed clay. You glimpse one swimmer's surface, teeth clamped around the rope like an over-enthusiastic Labrador. He spits water, shouts a blessing to Tlaloc the rain god, and disappears again, bubbles tracing his path. Now the elders signal the moment of truth. Every available body lines the raft edges, knees braced, arms extended. On a count of 3, really more a chaotic chorus of Oxley, you all shove down in unison. The mat groans, water billows over its sides, and then, miracle. Instead of sinking into oblivion, it rebounds, bobbing gently like a giant lily pad. Reed fibers trap air. The mud layer weighs it but doesn't drown it. Physics meet tacos for millions scalability. You crawl back aboard, heart hammering. The new chinampa skeleton sways underfoot yet feels oddly trustworthy, like a hammock woven by someone who truly loves naps. Someone plants a willow stake at one corner, tapping it with a volcanic rock mallet until you're sure it pierces the planet's core. More stakes follow along the perimeter, living fences that will sprout roots and branches, knitting the raft to its watery address. Lunch arrives by canoe, tamales steamed in corn husks and stuffed with pumpkin blossoms, plus a clay jug of atole sweetened with agave. You bite into a tamal, steam fogs your lashes. Joke number 3 quivers out around molten masa. I finally understand farm to table, only here the table floats. The elder with bass string hearing actually chuckles, a sound like stones tumbling in cool water. Victory. As the sun arcs overhead, the mat darkens from tan green to brindled brown, soaking up warmth. Steam wisps off damp mud, tiny clouds rehearsing for rainy season. A pair of axolotls surface between chinampas, gills frilling like pink lace collars. Tockley beckons you closer. Listen. You crouch, soft cracking noises echo beneath. Microtunnels of trapped gas escape as bacteria chew through organics, proof the soil is waking. Evening shadows stretch long and the elders declare the day's work blessed. Flowers, scarlet sempastile, are sprinkled along the center seam, their citrus scent masking mud's funk. Quirky off-script tidbit. Some chinampa crews insist the marigold's color tells spirits. Construction zone, watch your step. Who needs OSHA when you have the dearly departed? Torches flare again, painting reeds gold. You notice your reflection in the canal, cheeks streaked brown, hair tufted, smile ridiculous, yet pride flickers. In less than 12 hours, you helped birth floating farmland out of nothing but reeds, silt, and communal stubbornness. Tomorrow, seedlings will sink delicate roots into this brand new earth, and one day squash vines will dangle where you currently sit cross-legged. As night thins the noise, someone begins that familiar clay flute lullaby, 3 notes rising, 3 falling like a breath. You roll onto your back, staring at unfamiliar constellations mirrored in dark water. The chinampa beneath you drifts a fraction, then stills, matching your heartbeat. If the lake decides to shrug, you'll wobble. If a willow root digs in, you'll steady. Either way, you and the garden are now bound to the same gentle suspense, waiting for sunrise, seedlings, and maybe a second helping of tamales. Your dreams wobble like the chinampa under your back, half squash vines, half floating furniture, and then Tokli is shaking your shoulder again. "We plant before the heat cooks the roots," he says, as though that's just a regular phrase and not a threat worthy of an ancient doom scroll. The new chinampa feels firmer this morning, as though it knows it's being watched. A layer of mist still clings to the water like a lazy cat refusing to get up. Overhead, the sun peeks over distant volcanoes, licking everything in soft pinks and golds. Somewhere nearby, frogs perform a squelchy percussion concert, occasionally joined by a belch from a heron who by now must have a fan club. Seedlings arrive by canoe, tucked into tight bundles like vegetable burritos: maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, chili, and the unsung hero, amaranth. Each baby plant peeks out from its wrap, eager and smug, like it knows it'll be salsa before you even finish brushing mud from your tunic. The planting team lays the bundles out in long rows along the chinampa, and suddenly the bare mat looks like a dinner service waiting for courses. Tokli claps his hands once. "Milpa style," he says, and you nod knowingly, even though you absolutely do not know. Mainstream historical fact alert. The Milpa system is more than crop rotation. It's a mutual aid society in root form. Corn grows tall, giving beans something to climb. Beans fix nitrogen in the soil, feeding the others. Squash sprawls out wide, shading the ground and choking weeds. Add chili and tomatoes, and you basically have the Aztec version of a 7-layer dip. The first hole is poked by a planting stick, about hip height, sharpened and worn like a well-loved broom handle. You try your hand at it. The mud parts with a satisfying gurgle, and you drop a few corn seeds in, patting them down like a sleepy pet. Next hole, beans. Next, squash. Repeat. Your back creaks in protest after row 6, but a gardener grins and says, "Now imagine doing this on 50 more rafts." Joke number 1 creaks out of you. "You mean I can't just copy and paste?" Once the chinampa is planted, a light mulch of lakeweed is spread over the top. It keeps the moisture in and nosy ducks out, or so you hope. One duck waddles by and gives you a stare that says, "We'll see." Quirky tidbit of the day. Some chinampa farmers braid bright feathers into their hair, not for fashion, but to scare birds into thinking they're giant predatory parrots. You consider this. You also consider inventing the scarecrow 1,000 years early. By midday, it's hot enough to bake tamales on the mud. Sweat glues your tunic to your back, and your planting stick doubles as a cane. Just when you're sure you're about to melt into the soil and become part of the system, a shout comes from the canal. Pulque! The sacred beverage arrives in a gourd jug, fizzy and cloudy like the lake's mood after a storm. Tokli hands you a cup. "Don't chug," he warns. You sip. It tastes like fermented oatmeal and regret with a floral afterkick. "So kombucha's tougher older cousin?" you whisper. Joke number 2 lands. Barely. One elder nearly smiles. As the team rests in the shade of young willows, the conversation drifts to garden politics. Which family owns which chinampas? Who keeps their mud recipe secret? Who's rumored to have trained a Cody to sniff out ripe tomatoes? Historians still argue whether these floating farms were privately owned plots or rotated communal assets. Some codices hint at both, depending on the season, the crop, or the phase of the moon. Land, even soggy land, inspires turf wars. A nearby gardener points toward the horizon. You squint. Another raft is being built, but this one is surrounded by priests in feathered cloaks. "That's a chinampa for the temple," she says. "Offerings only. Flowers, cacao, sacred maize." You realize not all chinampas feed mouths. Some feed gods. Later, she explains, the harvested flowers will decorate altars, while sacred maize will be ground by virgins for ceremonial tamales. You blink. Joke number 3 is entirely internal. Maybe the gods are just really into themed brunch. That afternoon, you join a team inspecting older chinampas for damage. Some have eroded corners or sagging middles. The gardeners talk about repairs like doctors discussing old injuries. One man pats a bamboo stake and murmurs, "She twisted last flood but held the line." Repairs involve tamping down new mud, tightening reed lashings, and occasionally adding a layer of dead fish under the topsoil. You gag. The gardener shrugs. "Fish make good ghosts," he says. Apparently, their decay feeds the plants and deters certain bugs. Nutrient bomb and pesticide in one bloated package. Nearby, a younger chinampa is getting a strange upgrade. Someone's laying out white stones in a spiral. For the rain, Tockley explains. Some say the pattern pulls clouds, others say it just looks nice. You nod. Historians still argue whether these symbolic shapes actually influenced weather or just acted as rain dance reminders. Either way, you're tempted to spell out "send snacks" in pebbles. By sunset, your legs feel like boiled reeds, your hands smell like swamp bread, and your heart, oddly, hums. Every chinampa passed on the paddle home is an echo of the morning. Young corn leaves twitching in the breeze, vines curling around bean poles, a light drizzle of silt falling from a canoe's passing wake. Everything alive, everything floating. A canoe glides past, children perched on its bow like feathered figureheads. One tosses you a tiny tomato. You catch it, bite, and blink. It tastes of sunlight and leaf whispers. A perfect gift. Back at your raft lodging, the heron returns to judge you. You raise your planting stick in salute. He blinks once. Truce. Night falls soft, the way a favorite blanket does when your eyes begin to shut. The chinampa creaks beneath you, a lullaby of mud and water. You drift, not quite dreaming, not quite awake, and imagine the lake murmuring, "Good work, soft-footed gardener. You're learning to float." You wake to a sound like someone massaging a sack of frogs underwater. It's the lake again, restless, rhythmic, slapping gently against the chinampa's sides. But something's different today. A scent rides the breeze, sharp, mineral, earthy. You sit up. Tockley's already crouched at the edge of the raft, scooping a handful of rich black ooze into a basket. "Time to feed the mother," he says, and though you'd normally demand context, your fingers are already itching to dig. Today is about renewal. Every chinampa, no matter how lush, must be maintained, fed like a living being. The mud hauled from the bottom of the canals, what gardeners call tlalmixtli, or earth mist, is the beating heart of this cycle. You clamber into the canoe, knees cracking like sun-baked maize tortillas, and help Tockley paddle toward a deeper stretch where the lake bed is generous and sticky. You dip a flat-bottomed scoop into the murky water, wrangle it to the depths, then lift. The first load is waterlogged and wobbly, but the second comes up thick and dark like wet chocolate cake. Quirky tidbit, the best mud is stolen from old canals where leaf rot, fish droppings, and volcanic silt have been slow cooking for seasons. Some elders test its quality by taste. You, wisely, do not. Back at the chinampa, you slosh the mud into baskets and begin the sacred ritual of slathering. It's exactly as glamorous as it sounds. You and the others, gardeners, teens, even one baby enthusiastically flinging fistfuls, spread the muck in thin layers between the rows of seedlings. The earth is hungry, and you are the chef. Mainstream historical fact: this replenishing method allowed the Aztecs to farm the same chinampa year-round without exhausting the soil. While medieval Europe wrestled with fallow field systems and crop failures, Tenochtitlan's farmers were over here running floating super farms with non-stop productivity. A single hectare of chinampa could feed 20 people. Compare that to dry land farming, and suddenly these swamp gardens look like green gold. One of the gardeners points to a withered squash leaf. "Too much sun," she mutters, flicking her wrist. Someone fetches lake weed. lays it like a blanket over the soil, and tucks it gently beneath the vines. You watch, amazed. Every touch is tender, every decision measured. Joke number 1 sneaks out. If I die, I want these people to handle my funeral arrangements. You get a light chuckle and a smear of mud to the forehead. You notice the soil isn't just food, it's memory. Each layer contains remnants of past seasons, corn husks, flower petals, even the occasional broken comb from a bee trap. You run your hands through the earth and find a pale shard of pottery patterned with blue paint, a whisper of someone else's lunch long ago. You turn to Toctli. Do we keep this? He shrugs. The chinampa gave it back. Maybe it wants it gone. Historians still argue whether chinampas preserved old artifacts intentionally, like living museums, or if those relics simply settled during floods and vanished into the muck until summoned again. Later, you're recruited to reweave the retaining walls. Every few weeks, the edges of a chinampa begin to fray like an old poncho. You gather fresh reeds, loop them in overlapping fans, and wedge them between the willow stakes. It's tricky, half craft, half mud wrestling, and it gives you the bruised appreciation of someone who's just wrestled a very slippery, very bendy snake. But when you finish, the new edge gleams gold in the sun, holding the soil with gentle insistence. You pause for breath, feet dangling into the water. Beneath the surface, tiny fish dart like silver commas in an unfinished sentence. Dragonflies hover overhead like awkward helicopters on first dates. A boy rows past, trailing a miniature raft no bigger than a baking tray. It carries a single pumpkin seedling and a carved figurine of Tlaloc. Joke number 2 murmurs out, a plant, a god, and a dream. Sounds like my first startup. You're starting to think these chinampa kids are immune to sarcasm. That afternoon, the gardeners begin a more mysterious task, adjusting the water. You didn't even realize you could adjust a lake, but here we are. They paddle down narrow canals and begin moving small gates, wooden boards wedged between stone channels. Water levels rise in some places, lower in others. We flood dry corners, dry flooded roots, Toctli explains. You squint. It's like plumbing, but with gods watching. Here's your scholarly debate for the day. Historians still argue whether this Watergate system was formalized by imperial edict or evolved through pure community tinkering. Some ancient records describe engineering councils. Others show nothing but local wisdom passed down orally. You suspect both. These gardeners might never read blueprints, but they feel the lake like a mother feels her child's fever. A gust of wind shakes pollen from the maize flowers, and you sneeze so hard a heron across the canal flaps off in alarm. Someone hands you a square of bark paper, tissue, Aztec edition. It's scratchier than you'd like. Joke number 3. Leaves were an option, but sure, let's exfoliate my nostrils. By sunset, the chinampa is quiet again. The plants gleam from their mud bath, refreshed and upright. The reeds along the edge whisper with approval, and the willows seem to lean in protectively. You lie back on the raft, muscles sighing, stomach rumbling. Dinner is tamales again, but this time with squash blossoms and bean paste. A gardener leans over with a smirk. Farmers eat what they grow. You take a bite. It's spicy, warm, and tastes faintly of lake wind. You suddenly understand why people would spend their entire lives doing this. Night slides in like a blanket. Torches flicker along distant paths, their reflections bobbing in the canals like tiny twin stars. You hear a flute again, low and meandering like someone playing for the moon. The chinampa rocks gently under your weight. You look up at the stars and realize you're part of a farm that doesn't just feed bodies, it grows stories too. And tonight, you're one of them. Dawn cracks open like an overripe tomato, seeping peach-colored light into every canal. You're back in the canoe, this time wedged between barrels that smell complicated. One whiff conjures dark chocolate, wet moss, and a suspicious hint of public latrine. Toxley grins. Mud alchemy day, he says, as though announcing free sweet rolls at the market. Your nose begs for hazard pay. Ahead, a convoy of flat-bottomed barges drifts in single file, their prows crowned with torch stubs that still gutter from a long night's work. Standing in each boat is a dredger. Burlap-wrapped shoulders, pants hitched high, wielding poles tipped with basket scoops. They plunge, turn, heave, again and again, lifting lake-bed treasure that drips like molten espresso. The cadence is hypnotic. Splash, suck, lift, thunk. Splash, suck, lift, thunk. You try to keep rhythm with your paddle, but mostly create windshield wiper chaos. At the far end of a wide lagoon, the crew beaches on a narrow strip of reed mat laid out like a landing pad. Everyone forms a sloppy bucket brigade, passing loads of oozing sediment to an enormous mixing pit ringed by slabs of volcanic rock. You hop into position and the first basket drops into your arms. It's warm, alive almost, shot through with tiny bubbles that pop against your wrists. Joke number 1 blurts, "So this is the Aztec spa treatment. Exfoliation plus existential dread?" A foreman waves you closer to the pit, where several layers already steam. Bottom stratum of last month's dredgings, middle layer of pulverized maize stalks, top dressing of night soil collected from Tenochtitlan's public latrines. Yes, night soil. Every empire needs a supply chain. The Aztecs simply made theirs circular. Canoes dedicated to the task shove off before dawn, ferrying neatly sealed clay pots of human waste to these outlying lagoon stations. Mainstream historical fact, by cycling city refuse back into chinampas soil, the Mexica maintained fertility without overhunting game for manure, achieving yields Europe wouldn't match until synthetic fertilizer centuries later. You gag politely as pot lids crack open, but the dredgers treat the stink like background music. One unfurls a twist of copal incense near your nose. Just breathe under the smoke, he advises. Quirky tidbit. Veteran mud mixers swear a line of burning copal not only masks the odor, but also persuades earth spirits to temper their temper. Whether metaphysical or merely olfactory camouflage, you gladly accept. Tockley drops his pole, rolls up sleeves, and dives hands first into the slurry. You follow, feeling the strata squish around your fingers. Warm dredge below, cool silt above, gritty night soil speckling like poppy seeds. The crew begins the spiral. Everyone circles the pit clockwise, churning the mixture with cupped hands. Each lap blurs, thick waves crawl from center to rim, blending into a uniform glossy brown. It actually looks like artisanal brownie batter, which your stomach files as treasonous deception. Halfway through lap 3, the foreman calls for a jocoddle, minced garlic lily bulbs famed for deterring soil nematodes. A runner brings a basket, tossing handfuls into the mud. Someone else sprinkles crushed chili seeds, flavor for the microbes, they laugh. Joke number 2 slips out. Remind me never to ask these cooks for actual brownies. A muddy elbow nudges approval. Now comes the folding. Using woven reed paddles, workers scoop mixture from the edges and slap it into the center mound over and over, building a low cone that shudders but holds form. The atmosphere feels ceremonial. Each paddle stroke lands to the beat of a two-skin drum somewhere on shore. Historians still argue whether these rhythms stemmed from formal agricultural rites dictated by priest engineers or arose as practical metronomes to pace labor teams. The debate, like the pit, remains deliciously thick. When the cone reaches waist height, the foreman jabs a stick into its heart and watches liquid seep out like coffee through a filter. "Ready," he declares. Crews haul broadleaf petlattle mats beside the mound. You and Toxley load gobbets of the mud onto sled-like trays, slide them across a reed bridge, and tip them into waiting canoes. Each vessel swallows half a ton before creaking. Time to deliver nutrients to hungry chinampas miles away. Paddling feels heavier today, literally. Your canoe sits so low the gun whales kiss water with every ripple. Yet the lake is calm, sunlight flaring off nearby volcano cones like polished obsidian mirrors. You catch whiffs of yesterday's maize pollen, mingling surprisingly well with, well, everything else. Somehow, the stench has mellowed, replaced by a warm, earthy aroma. Joke number 3 surfaces. Who needs perfume when you can dab behind your ears with eau de chinampa? Talkley fans his face theatrically. At the Target Garden, a venerable plot anchored by willows thick as military drumsticks, the farmers greet the convoy with cheers. They've already cleared channels between crop rows, exposing dark trenches ready for nutrient infusion. You totter along planks laid over seedlings, tipping baskets into furrows. As the mud slides out, it releases plumes of steam in the morning air. The seedlings shiver, almost grateful. One farmer explains, "We feed roots now so flowers don't beg later." Another adds, half serious, half mythic, "The mud holds stories. Fish bones whisper secrets to corn." You run gloved fingers through a fresh ribbon of dredge and find a tiny obsidian flake, gleaming like a shard of night sky. A callback to yesterday's pottery shard and a reminder that the lake never forgets. While the soil settles, the team concocts a finishing glaze. Algae water mixed with macerated nopal cactus brushed atop rows to lock in moisture. It forms a light crust that cracks delicately when stepped on but resists hard sun. This method predates terracotta irrigation pipes, yet achieves similar evaporation control. You're handed a brush made from bundled duck feathers. The quills tickle your wrist, making the task oddly meditative. Meal break arrives. Out of a reed hamper emerges chili-laced chocolate discs. You stare. Apparently, cacao mixed with fiery chilies is beloved by workers for its wake-up slap. You bite expecting chaos. It delivers, but pleasant chaos, like someone sang lullabies and set off fireworks simultaneously. The sugar rush meets chili burn in perfect handshake. Talkshley raises an eyebrow. Alchemy isn't just mud. Fair enough. As you rest, a flock of white herons lands in the shallows, stabbing for fish stirred by the dredging. Their wing beats draft cool air across your neck. You realize this entire ecosystem, birds, fish, microbes, corn, is looped into the chinampa's respiration. There is no waste, only transformation. But equilibrium wobbles. A messenger canoe splashes up, panting word of rising salinity beyond the causeway. Some claim freshwater springs upstream have slowed, others blame distant dry seasons. Historians still argue whether long-term salinization threatened chinampas before the Spanish arrival or accelerated only after colonial drainage projects. Either way, gardeners plan an overnight dredge of fresher silt from feeder canals to buffer the brine. The alchemy never ends. Dusk gilds everything apricot. The chinampas you fed this morning now wear a darker sheen, like chocolate truffles dusted with cocoa. Maize leaves rustle as if applauding. You and Talkley paddle home through narrowing corridors of torchlight, shoulders aching, stomachs oddly satisfied. Even the night soil smell has faded into nothing but earthy memory, proof that what repels at sunrise can nourish by sunset. You dock, step onto your lodging raft, and stretch beneath willow fronds trembling in the twilight breeze. Somewhere, that clay flute sketches its 3-note arc. The lake answers with a liquid sigh. You've learned the secret recipe: mud, muck, and above all, time. Let the city's refuse become tomorrow's bloom. Let dredgers keep their rhythm. Let the chinampa breathe stories through every seed it cradles. Tomorrow, you suspect, something equally pungent awaits. But for now, you lie back, inhale the damp night, and whisper thanks to the mud that never tires. You wake to singing, soft, layered voices rising from the mist. Not songs exactly, more like chants shaped by breath and rhythm. You sit up slowly, spine crackling like dry corn husks. The world is silver and soft. Fog hugs the lake and you can barely see the end of your chinampa. Tockley appears beside you, whispering, "It's the seed offering." You're just in time, which is, of course, an absurd thing to say. You didn't even know there was a seed offering. You follow him to the largest chinampa in the cluster, twice the size of any other and covered edge to edge in marigolds. Orange petals spill across the ground like someone tried to carpet the earth with fire. Farmers from across the lagoon have gathered, carrying bundles wrapped in woven cloth, all clutched tight to their chests. Seeds, hundreds of varieties, everything from maize and amaranth to chilacayote and chia. This is the day the seed vault breathes. Mainstream historical fact. The Aztecs, more precisely the Nahua people, maintained living seed banks on key chinampas. These were not hidden away in caves or dry temples, but cultivated, traded, and rotated seasonally to maintain biodiversity. When famine struck or floods wiped out an area, these sacred plots replenished the empire's future. Genetic insurance, Aztec edition. An elder steps forward, face painted with wet ash, and begins a long invocation to Chicomecoatl, the maize goddess. He cradles 3 maize cobs in each hand, their colors brilliant, red, black, yellow, blue, and one that looks like it was carved from pearl. The air smells of copal, sweat, and flower petals. A child sneezes. You try not to sneeze too, but that powdered pollen, it's got fight in it. As the prayers end, families step forward one by one and open their bundles. Seeds pour onto cloth mats in arranged spirals, each spiral a family's legacy. This one's from the volcano fields, someone explains. It grows short but fast. Another trader shakes out beans with a marble-like swirl and boasts, "These don't mind clay." Each seed gets a story, a joke, a warning, and yes, even a tiny blessing whispered as it changes hands. You're given your own cloth, handed a palm-sized gourd of mixihuitl, a sticky green paste made from crushed wild tobacco and salt. "Just a dot," says Tockley. "It tells the seeds they're wanted." You smear a little on your fingers, dip into a bowl of black amaranth, and press it gently onto your cloth. They stick to your skin like they've found home. Quirky tidbit: some Nahua believed certain seeds could hum if held in the dark long enough, tiny voices of future plants complaining about the delay. You don't hear anything yourself, but your ears definitely tingle. Now comes the dance. Yes, of course there's a dance. An elder drummer starts a steady beat, and 2 women wearing cloaks stitched with dry maize husks begin to circle the seed piles. Every step causes a soft rustle, like wind in a field before harvest. They don't move fast. It's more of a sway, a lullaby for the soil. "They're reminding the seeds how to grow," someone murmurs behind you. Historians still argue whether these rituals had scientific merit or were symbolic acts of agricultural hope. Some claim the motion helped sort seeds by weight or texture. Others insist it was pure devotion. Either way, you find yourself swaying too, caught in the pulse. Joke number 1. I didn't expect to slow dance with legumes, but here we are. After the dance, the real work begins. Seeds are distributed for trials. 6 farmers raise hands for the mountain maize. Others clamor for the night-blooming squashes. Arguments bloom like weeds. "You took it last year. That plot still hasn't returned anything." One woman holds up a basket and simply growls. You find yourself wondering what happens if someone plants the wrong seeds out of spite. Tochley shrugs. They don't grow, or they grow angry. You can't tell if he's joking. Another call echoes across the chinampa. "Tlazo Kamadi!" Thank you, the distribution is done and the bundles tucked safely into boats, but a few remain. Rare seeds with odd shapes, old names, uncertain reputations. These are given to a tiny group of experimental gardeners known as the Keepers of the Weird. You love them immediately. One such keeper waves you over and shows off a seed that looks like a shrunken walnut, deeply ridged, deep and bluish gray. It feeds no one, she says, smiling, but it draws bees like gold. You lean in. So it's a party plant? She nods. Exactly. Joke number 2. Glad to know even Aztec gardens needed a DJ. You help the keeper row to her chinampa, which smells sweeter than the rest. Honeysuckle and mint, with a splash of wet moss. It's smaller, messier, and absolutely buzzing with life. Bees swarm gently overhead, butterflies swirl like lost confetti, and tiny lizards sun themselves on low logs. Every chinampa feeds bodies, she says, but some also feed ideas. She tucks the odd seed into a depression carved into a stone. No basket, no ceremony, just stone and shade, and her hand resting lightly over it. You ask how she'll know it's growing. If it hums again, she replies. You really hope it does. Later, back at the marigold-covered plot, Tockley and others close the ceremony by building a spiral mound of maize, amaranth, beans, and squash, the 4 sisters. They pour lake water over it in a slow spiral. This, he explains, reminds us the cycle depends on everyone. He adds 1 blue corn kernel to the top. Even you. You're startled, moved, and slightly pressured by that kernel. What if it doesn't sprout? What if your palm was too sweaty? What if it grows upside down? Joke number 3 spills out nervously. If mine grows backwards, does that mean I invent reverse corn? No one laughs. You begin to fear reverse corn is not funny, but Tockley gives you a wink. Just means it's finding another way. By dusk, the chinampa has returned to stillness. The marigolds sway in chorus, seeds nestled safely in pockets of cloth and hope. You lie on your reed mat and run your fingers through a handful of leftover amaranth. The grains are so small, it's hard to believe they hold entire stalks, leaves, and flower heads inside. The flute plays again, lower this time. Almost thoughtful. You close your eyes and wonder which seeds will sprout first. Which ones will fail? Which ones will wait years before singing? And in that quiet, you feel it again. Not the chant, not the song, but the pulse of a lake that knows how to remember and forgive. You wake with a fish on your foot, not metaphorically. A literal, flopping, silver-scaled fish wriggling over your toes like it's auditioning for a water ballet. You yelp, the fish flops off the raft into the water, and Tockley, of course, bursts into a slow, half-asleep laugh. Welcome to Harvest Day, he mumbles, still cocooned in his blanket. The fish are in a hurry. He's not wrong. The lake is alive this morning. Slick backs breaking the surface, tiny ripples chasing dragonflies, birds dive-bombing like they just found out brunch is mandatory. The Chinampa canals aren't just for transport or irrigation. They're the grocery aisle, too. And today, you're going fishing, Aztec style. Tockley hands you a net that looks like a hammock mated with a spider web. No poles, he says. We think like birds. You decide not to ask what birds think about. You just go with it. You paddle to a shallow cove where willow roots dangle into the water like noodles. Perfect, Tockley says. Fish hide here from the sun, but not from us. He slips into the water like a ghost and signals you to follow. You protest that your foot's still soggy from its surprise fish visitor, but he's already submerged, net trailing behind him like seaweed. Mainstream historical fact, Aztec Chinampa farmers didn't just cultivate crops, they engineered aquatic micro-ecosystems teeming with fish, amphibians, and waterfowl. Tilapia, axolotls, and carol, tiny freshwater fish, were all part of the food loop, offering rich protein in a plant-heavy diet. Unlike modern monoculture systems, these floating farms embraced variety. You lower your net slowly. The water is cool and thick with life. Sunlight stabs through in ribbons, glinting off fish scales and stirring bits of algae. Your fingers tremble, but not from fear, from anticipation. You feel like a raccoon about to make regrettable choices. Suddenly, to your horror and excitement, you catch 3 twitching Carol in your net. They're barely longer than your pinky, but furious about their new situation. Tockley surfaces beside you, triumphant with a full pouch. "Breakfast," he grins, teeth flashing. You row back with buckets full of tiny fish. At the chinampa, an elder gardener greets you with a bowl of nixtamal dough and a slab of clay griddle already heating over coals. She's not wasting time. While Tockley guts the fish with what can only be described as casual brutality, you kneel beside her and watch as she mixes minced carol into the dough, forms patties, and presses them flat. "Charal tlaxcali," she says, patting each one into the fire with gentle slaps. "Power food. Makes you good at math." Joke number 1. "You sure it's not just good for fishy breath?" She doesn't laugh, probably because it's true. The scent that fills the air is shockingly appetizing. Roasted corn, crisped fish skin, and a hint of ash. You devour your first fish tortilla with zero hesitation. It's smoky, salty, and weirdly buttery. You think you might be developing an addiction. Toshley eats 4. "Now we go to the bird farmer," he says, brushing crumbs off his chest. You imagine a man herding geese with a little flute. You're not far off. He lives at the far edge of the chinampa zone, where the canal thins into a reed-dense maze. His raft is covered in ducks. Literally, hundreds of them, waddling and quacking and napping in the sun. You've never seen so many birds in one place without an entrance fee. "They're tamed," Tockley explains, "but also freeloaders." The farmer waves you over and opens a gourd filled with chopped water snails and lake insects. "Duck lunch," he says proudly, tossing handfuls onto the raft. Mainstream historical fact: the Aztecs cultivated wildfowl alongside crops, especially ducks and herons. These weren't caged or penned, but managed through food incentives and strategically placed nesting islets. It was free-range farming centuries before organic became a thing. The ducks swarm the snack pile like preschoolers on cupcake day. "We gather eggs," the farmer says, gesturing to reed baskets nestled in the corners. "And down. Trade with textile makers." He plucks a few down feathers and holds them out. They're cloud soft. You press one to your cheek and nearly fall asleep again. Tockley pulls you aside to show something stranger, a floating nest tethered by cords to a chinampa tree. Inside is a brood of black-headed ducks, just hatched. "He made that raft for the nest," he whispers. He says it tricks the lake into thinking they're wild again. Historians still argue whether these semi-wild bird farms were coordinated empire-wide or evolved independently in different lake communities. Some say there were tribute quotas for eggs and feathers. Others argue the practices stayed mostly local and barter-based. Either way, it works. You help collect duckweed from a shallow canal, tiny floating plants like little green shields. The ducks love them. Also helps keep the water cool, the farmer notes. Shade for the fish. Everything has 2 purposes here. Even the trash. Even the plants you'd ignore anywhere else. You spot a glistening pile of water hyacinth and ask why no one throws it out. "We wrap seedlings in it," someone says, stuffing a maize sprout into a bundle like a baby burrito. "It holds water, makes a good cradle." Joke number 2. "Should I be calling you a farmer or a magician?" Tockley smirks. "Call me a mud wizard." By midday, the ducks have stopped swarming and begun sunbathing. The fish have burrowed deeper into shade. The chinampa sighs under the weight of heat and labor. But your raft is full, a basket of eggs, fish, greens, and yes, duck feathers, which you're weirdly protective of now. Back at base camp, you help prepare dinner. This time it's mixiotes, bundles of meat, herbs, and cactus wrapped in maguey leaves and roasted over coals. The meat, not duck. Relax. It's frog. Quirky tidbit, Lake Xochimilco frogs were considered both delicacy and spiritual symbol. Priests believed their croaks foretold rain. Farmers believed they were good eating. You're not sure where you stand, but the mixiote smells too good to debate. You bite in. It's tender, herby, and a little chewy. You wash it down with a tole, thick maize drink flavored with cacao and vanilla. Joke number 3. This is the weirdest smoothie I've ever liked. Tockley leans back against a reed post, belly full, feathers stuck in his hair. Tomorrow, he says dreamily, you learn about bugs. You groan. You knew it was coming. But as fireflies blink over the canals and the last ducks tuck their heads under wings, you feel oddly ready for anything, even insects. The lake burbles gently beneath you. Somewhere a frog croaks like it's got urgent news. You pat your stomach, hum your own sleepy chant, and smile at the feathers tucked under your arm. The chinampa doesn't just feed empires, it feeds odd little dreams too. You wake to chirping, not birdsong, but something more. Crunchy, rhythmic, like someone's trying to tap out a message in Morse code using tiny exoskeletons. Tockley grins before you've even opened both eyes. Told you, he says, tossing a live cricket onto your blanket. Bug day. You stare at it, half horrified, half curious. It's not bad looking, actually. Shiny, bronze, twitchy. Kind of adorable if it weren't, well, edible. Because yes, today's lesson is about insects, the unsung protein stars of the chinampa system. You slip your sandals on and follow Tockley along a dew-drenched canal path through a tangle of maize stalks and squash vines. The mist clings to your arms like damp gauze. He's carrying a gourd drum filled with chirping. Just a few escapees, he shrugs. Your first stop is with a woman tending a small raised patch of earth next to the water. Neither a full chinampa nor a garden bed. It's crawling, literally. Dozens of grasshoppers, beetles, and even fat maguey worms wriggle across it, attracted to the fermented fruit mash spread across the soil. It smells like a compost bin had a party. Bug lure, she explains, waving you over. We feed them well, then eat them better. She picks up a grasshopper between two fingers, turns it gently like she's inspecting a coin, then plops it into a clay jar. Salt later, she adds cheerfully. Mainstream historical fact, insect protein was a staple of the Aztec diet. Chapulines, grasshoppers, ahuale, insect roe, and escamoles, ant larvae, were not only common but celebrated. Nutritious, efficient, and surprisingly sustainable, they were harvested from lake beds, cactus patches, and nests tucked into reed walls. You try not to flinch as a dragonfly skims your shoulder. Tockley nudges you toward the next treat, a basket of freshly roasted chapulines. They're crisp, seasoned with lime and chile, and you hate to admit this, they smell good. One bite, he dares. You pick the tiniest, most apologetic-looking grasshopper, close your eyes, and crunch. It's delicious, salty, smoky, like popcorn with a hint of forest floor. Quirky tidbit, some Nahua believe grasshoppers stored wind in their legs. Eat too many and get breezes in your belly for days. Wind burps, basically. You take a second one just to test the theory. Now it's time for ahual, the insect caviar of the empire. You're led to a quiet lagoon where the water looks like it's covered in tiny rice grains. Only it's not rice, it's the eggs of aquatic insects laid on floating reeds. Carefully, the gatherers lift these reed mats and shake them into baskets. The eggs drop like dry rain. High tribute item, says Tockley. Even nobles fought over these. You watch as the eggs are mixed into masa, shaped into discs and pan-fried. The texture is chewy, crispy. The taste? Nutty, rich, almost like quinoa met a marshmallow and got toasted. Joke number 1. I came for tacos, stayed for the insect brunch buffet. Not everyone laughs, but a few elders nod approvingly. Next up, Eskimos. Ant larvae harvested from chinampa edges, dug out with thin sticks like treasure from a wriggling vault. A young girl hands you a spoonful. You expect squirmy horror. You get creamy, buttery softness like scrambled eggs with sass. You're weirdly impressed. Tockley shrugs. We eat what's smart to grow. He points out that raising pigs or cattle would have wrecked the chinampa soil. Too heavy, too destructive. But bugs? They don't trample anything. They thrive in small spaces and they multiply like math homework. Historians still argue whether insects were central to daily meals or reserved for market days and special feasts. Some claim they were side dishes. Others say they were prized delicacies. You're starting to think it depends on the seasoning. You try another dish, tamales stuffed with roasted ants and smoked squash blossom. The flavors melt into each other, earthy and bright. You've officially stopped flinching. In fact, you're now actively plotting your next bite. As you sit licking chile from your fingers, the bug farmer woman shows you her final trick. She lifts a clay tile near her garden, revealing a fat, coiled grub the size of your thumb. Metzli's candy, she says. It squirms slightly. Tastes like hazelnut if you roast it right. You decline. There is a line. Joke number 2. I'm all for adventure, but if the food blinks at me, I blink back. Still, you admire the bravery and the balance. These people eat in a way that cycles back into the land. Nothing goes to waste. Even the leftover bug parts are tossed into compost pits or used as fertilizer. It's not just sustainable, it's symbiotic. Later in the afternoon, you help prepare bug snacks for barter. Roasted chapulines are sealed in waxed cloth, ahuatl cakes wrapped in maize husks, ant larva tamales tied with twine. Tochley teaches you the symbol for insect in the pictograph trade codes. Looks like a zigzag with wings. You ask what they trade for. Salt, cotton, turquoise if we're lucky, or chocolate. You both sigh dreamily at that last one. He points to a trader arriving by canoe, a woman with baskets of cacao pods. The deal is swift. Bugs for beans. Protein for pleasure. Quirky fringe tip, cacao beans were once used as currency in markets. You could literally buy lunch with lunch. 5 beans for a tamale, 20 for a rabbit. You wonder what a pouch of roasted grasshoppers would go for. Inflation must have been crunchy. As dusk rolls in, the bug feast ends with a drink, pulque, infused with maguey worm dust. It tastes like fermented agave and daring. You raise your gourd. To the bugs, you toast. Everyone joins in. To the bugs. You fall asleep in a hammock strung between 2 young willows. The night air is sweet and cool. Fireflies dance above you like someone cracked the stars open early. And the crickets, they chirp with perfect timing, little lullabies with legs. Joke number 3. If they start harmonizing, I'm joining the band. You dream of wings and flavors and tiny voices whispering, "We told you so." Your dream is interrupted by something unexpected. Silence. Gone is the chirping orchestra, the duck squabbles, the gurgle of the canal. You sit up in your hammock and blink at a hazy gray world. A thick fog has rolled in, turning the chinampas into floating shadows. Even Tochley looks ghost-like as he appears with a bowl of warm atole in each hand. "No fish today," he murmurs, as if the air might break. "We dig." You pause, confused. Dig? Aren't you already standing on floating soil? But no, today you're going below the green. Beneath the tidy rows of maize and tomatoes lies the real secret to the chinampas' power. The mud. Thick, mineral-rich lakebed sludge that breathes life into the islands above. It's mucky, messy, and everything depends on it. You follow Tochley into a reed canoe and paddle out toward a fallow chinampa, a resting one, as he calls it. It looks wild and scraggly, overgrown with water, celery, and moss, but he grins at it like it's a friend back from vacation. He hands you a long-handled scoop, woven from reeds and turtle shell. Time to feed the island. Mainstream historical fact: one of the key innovations of the chinampa system was the regular dredging of lake sediment to replenish soil nutrients. Aztecs used specialized tools to pull up layers of organic rich mud, which they then spread onto the chinampa surfaces in thin, even layers, a natural composting cycle that could continue indefinitely. You wade ankle deep into the water, shivering. The mud is dense and almost warm, like pudding left out too long. You plunge your scoop into the lake bed and lift. It's heavier than expected and smells earthy, faintly of old algae and something sweetly rotten. Perfect, says Tockley. Smells like breakfast for plants. Joke number 1. Great. I've become a 5-star chef for corn. You drag load after load of black gold onto the raft. The pile grows, steam rising from it in the cool air. It's exhausting but weirdly satisfying, like icing a cake made of swamp. Tockley hums an old tune about earth goddess Tlaltecutli, whose mouth opened into the ground and fed the crops with her breath. Quirky tidbit: some chinampa farmers still whisper thanks to Tlaltecutli before dredging, believing the mud holds fragments of her body. Offerings of cacao, obsidian flakes, or even chili seeds are sometimes tossed into the muck as tribute. You slip a chili seed from last night's tamale into the water, just in case. Once your raft is full, you paddle back to a working chinampa and start spreading. The mud oozes into rows between maize stalks, darkening the soil and feeding the roots. It's messy, hands-on work. You lose a sandal, you find someone else's, hopefully from this century. Tockley shows you how to mix crushed reeds and lake algae into the mud for extra richness. Greens for greens, he jokes. The whole process feels oddly like baking if your oven was the sun and your ingredients included slime. You ask how often they do this. Every season, he replies, sometimes more, depends on the corn's mood. Historians still argue whether this dredging technique evolved locally or was taught by earlier civilizations like the Teotihuacanos or the Toltecs. What's clear is that by the time the Mexica rose to power, the system was nearly perfect and entirely self-sustaining. After hours of work, you and Tockley collapse under the shade of a willow tree. Your arms are jelly, your legs stained brown. Now we nap, he announces, as if that were a sacred ritual. But the rest doesn't last long. Soon, an elder arrives with a worried frown. The southern canals are thinning, she says. Time to clear the roots, you groan. Is this still part of digging? Oh no, Tockley says cheerfully. Now we do underwater landscaping. Back in the canoe, you head for a narrow stretch of canal. Thick tangles of roots and weeds choke the waterway, slowing the current. It looks like a salad trying to become a forest. You dive in. It's murky, cool, and full of surprises. Eels slither past your legs, fish dart into root pockets. You tug at tangled plants, slicing through them with a sharpened obsidian shard. The water gradually clears, and you feel the canal sigh with relief. Mainstream historical fact: canal maintenance was critical to chinampa agriculture. Aztec workers regularly dredged not just for soil, but also to keep waterways navigable and oxygenated. They used specialized tools, from reed knives to obsidian blades, and even trained children to spot blockages before they grew dangerous. As you work, you notice something glinting in the mud, a fragment of pottery etched with symbols. Tockley examines it and nods solemnly. Ancestor trash, he says. Probably someone's soup bowl. You wonder how many stories lie buried in this lake bed. You're literally elbow deep in ancient leftovers. Quirky detail. Some chinampa farmers claim they've pulled up lost jewelry, jade beads, or even tiny clay whistles from the lake bed, items sunk during feasts, funerals, or storms. You don't find any treasure, but you do find a very annoyed turtle. You apologize profusely. By midday, the canals are flowing again. The chinampas glisten with fresh mud, and your back feels like it's aged 300 years. But the plants already look perkier. Maize leaves turn toward the sky. Beans stretch a little farther. The squash blossoms wink open in gratitude. Tockley claps your shoulder with a muddy hand. You did it. You're officially one of us. Joke number 2. Great. Do I get a badge or just lifelong back pain? He offers you a roasted frog leg and a piece of honey-soaked amaranth cake. Both. You eat by the water's edge, watching ducks paddle in neat lines past your cleared canal. Dragonflies hover like curious spirits. The chinampa buzzes, not with sound, but with energy, like the soil itself is singing. Joke number 3. I think the corn's judging my digging technique. Toshley squints. Corn always judges. As twilight falls, you lie back in the canoe, drifting slowly through the now sparkling canal. Stars peek through the fading mist. Somewhere nearby, a flute plays, soft, off-key, perfect. The chinampas are quiet again, not because they're asleep, but because they're listening. To your breath. To the roots you cleared. To the mud you stirred. You've joined the rhythm. You close your eyes, hands still crusted in ancient soil, heart beating in sync with the floating farm beneath you. Tomorrow will bring new planting, new creatures, maybe even more fish on your feet. But tonight you rest inside the breath of the earth. The first thing you hear in the morning isn't birds or frogs or Tockley's voice. It's music, but not the melodic kind. This is rhythmic thudding, like someone's dropping watermelons on a wooden floor. You sit up in your hammock and peer out. A line of chinampa farmers are pounding something with heavy wooden poles, synchronized like a drum line, their shoulders rising and falling like waves. Tockley waves you over. You're just in time, he says. It's compost morning. You stare at the enormous mound in front of you. It steams gently in the dawn light, a stinky tower of greatness. This is the compost pile, the dark and fragrant heart of chinampa fertility. It's not glamorous. It smells like if someone mixed wet leaves, dead fish, and optimism. But it works. You grab a paddle-shaped board and join in. Mainstream historical fact, the Aztecs were masters of organic recycling. They collected kitchen scraps, plant debris, animal droppings, and even human waste to create compost for their chinampas. The result was nutrient-dense soil that needed almost no artificial additives and kept crops healthy year after year. Thud, thud. You smack the pile like it owes you money. It gives a satisfying squelch each time. Across from you, a woman named Ezel is singing softly, timing her strikes with the lyrics. You can't tell if it's a work song or a lullaby for the microbes. Quirky tidbit. Aztec nobles had portable toilets that were emptied by servants and sent straight to the compost pits. Your dignity may survive many things, but imagining a warrior poet with a poop bucket might be its final test. You help mix crushed maize husks, fish bones, and something that may once have been a melon into the pile. Then you grab an armful of dried lake weeds and layer them like icing. The pile is a living thing, full of worms, bacteria, and heat. Literally. You could bake tortillas on this thing. Joke number 1. In a shocking twist, the hottest place in town is the trash pile. Ezel laughs, then offers you a jug of water mixed with fermented plant juice. To the heap, she says. Without it, nothing grows. You take a sip. It's sour, but you pretend to enjoy it. Compost camaraderie is important. After breakfast, which involves tamales stuffed with squash and a handful of wild berries, you join Tockley in another garden. This one's smaller, more experimental. Rows of odd plants twist and curl in directions that look like a toddler drew them. New varieties, he explains. We test here before planting them big. This is the Chinampa's R&D lab, a place of curiosity, risk, and occasional disaster. You kneel next to a patch of bluish maize. The kernels are plump and glimmer slightly, like tiny sapphires. They say it resists pests better, Tockley says, but it also might taste like sadness. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs practiced what we'd now call selective breeding. choosing plants with desirable traits and cross-pollinating them, or if they stumbled onto it through observation. Either way, the results speak for themselves. Dozens of maize strains, beans of all sizes, chilies that range from tickle to death. Tockley shows you a diagram scratched into a clay tablet. It's a crude chart of rainfall patterns, plant responses, and lunar phases. "My uncle says the moon affects how beans grow," he whispers. "My aunt says he's just looking for excuses when the harvest is bad." You test one of the new squashes. It smells like mint and mustard. "Don't eat that," Izel warns. "Last time, Tockley turned green for a week." Quirky tip: some chinampa farmers whispered that talking kindly to new plants helped them grow straighter. Others believed leaving small figurines, tiny clay animals, or smiling faces among seedlings encouraged good behavior. You find a little clay duck among the maize. He's smiling. You smile back. By midday, it's time to gather soil samples. You're given a basket, a scraping spoon, and a piece of color-matching cloth. "We check the soil every moon," Tockley says. "If it's too pale, we add compost. Too dark, we mix in dry reeds." You wander from patch to patch, crouching like a detective, holding up the cloth, sniffing, squinting, deciding if a chinampa needs help. It feels oddly intimate, like diagnosing a friend's mood. You come across a section where the soil is clumpy and cracked. "Too salty," Tockley frowns. "Need to flood and drain it." Mainstream fact: the Aztecs understood soil salinity before modern chemistry. When a patch became too salty due to evaporated lake water, they'd flood it with fresh water, drain it, and then let it dry before planting again. A surprisingly effective rinse cycle. Joke number 2, soil therapy, where even dirt gets spa days. You help install small canals that will carry clean water to the salty patch. Then you and Tockley use dried agave leaves to fan the surface, speeding up the evaporation. It's hot, it's sticky, and it feels like farming in a sauna. By late afternoon, you smell something strange, warm, nutty, slightly smoky. Izel reappears, holding a steaming bowl of tlaxcali, a maize flatbread, fresh off a stone comal. She tears off a piece, sprinkles it with ground amaranth and roasted bugs, and hands it to you. It tastes like the chinampa itself, deep, earthy, comforting. After the meal, the last task of the day is charting results. You sit with the elders in a shady spot while they record compost ratios, plant performance, and pest sightings using pictographs on bark paper. A squiggle means mold. A triangle means excellent yield. A rabbit's ear means watch this one closely. Tockley draws a tiny squiggle over your minty squash. Still suspicious. Joke number 3. At least I didn't turn green, yet. As the sun lowers, the fields glow golden and soft. The compost pile now rests under a fresh tarp of reeds, steaming contentedly. The experimental garden shimmers with possibility and the smell of roasted earth. You lie down in the soil, clean soil, don't worry, and feel its warmth through your back. It hums faintly like a drumbeat beneath the surface. You close your eyes and imagine each grain carrying the memory of hands, sun, and sky. The chinampa doesn't just feed bodies, it feeds futures. And you, somehow, are part of it now. The next morning, you wake to chaos. Not the usual sleepy rustling of ducks or Tockley humming an off-key ballad. No, this is serious shouting, splashes, and the unmistakable sound of angry oars. You scramble up, rubbing compost from your ear, and see a commotion at the edge of a canal. A rival farmer, face painted with red clay and wearing feathers like they just walked out of a low-budget nature documentary, is yelling at one of Tockley's uncles. Something about borders, Tockley sighs, boundary disputes. Happens every time someone's corn starts growing taller than someone else's. You squint at the scene. The chinampas here are incredibly close together, just a few paddle strokes apart. And unlike property lines in your world, which involve fences or angry HOA meetings, these lines are made of water, sticks, and memory. Mainstream historical fact. Because chinampas were built in tight clusters and constantly maintained, disputes over ownership and maintenance rights were common. The Aztecs developed a surprisingly sophisticated system of land titles, oral agreements, and ritual witnesses to settle these tensions. Toshli drags you over as a neutral observer, which is hilarious considering you still can't remember which end of the canoe goes forward. The argument revolves around a cluster of squash vines that have wandered onto a neighboring chinampa. Toshli's uncle claims they're just friendly explorers. The rival farmer insists they're aggressive trespassers. You look at the squash, which honestly seem more confused than anything else. You suggest a compromise. Harvest the rogue squash and split the bounty. Both parties grumble, then agree. A third elder steps in to record the solution, using a codex scroll and a handful of colorful pictographs. Joke number 1. So in the end, justice was served, alongside squash. Later that morning, Toshli takes you to see something you didn't expect. A chinampa school. It's a low shelter woven from reeds and banana leaves, open to the breeze and shaded by trees. Children of all ages sit on the ground, listening to a wrinkled woman with a voice like rainfall. She's teaching them the calendario agricola, the agricultural calendar. One boy shouts out that the moon is currently in the stomach of the rabbit, and everyone nods like that makes complete sense. Quirky tidbit. The Aztec calendar didn't just track time, it guided farming, weather, rituals, and even haircut recommendations. Seriously. Certain days were lucky for planting beans, others were ideal for fishing or harvesting chilies. Some days were simply marked do nothing or you'll regret it. The kids chant a rhyme about maize that's basically a bedtime story and weather forecast rolled into one. You're handed a woven mat and told to join the lesson. The teacher explains how the sun moves differently over Lake Xochimilco than it does over dry land, affecting planting times. The water listens to the sky, she says, and so must we. You scribble notes on a palm leaf with a piece of charcoal, feeling very studious. Then you immediately drop your writing tool into a canal and spend 15 minutes fishing it out with a stick. Next, the class shifts to a mapping activity. Each child draws their family's chinampa from memory, where the squash go, where the ducks sleep, where the compost pile steams. One girl, no older than 6, includes a tiny drawing of a frog in a hat. That's the guardian, she whispers. He keeps our beans brave. Historians still argue whether this kind of education was formal or more like storytelling passed down through generations. What's certain is that Aztec children, even those from farming families, learned from an early age how to read the sky, read the soil, and respect the unseen forces behind both. You spend the afternoon helping the kids build mini chinampas in bowls of water. They stack mud, twigs, and pebbles to create tiny floating gardens. One kid insists on adding a miniature warrior figurine who defends the lettuce. Joke number 2. I mean, if I were lettuce, I'd feel safer. Toshli pulls you aside. Now you've seen how we train the future, he says. Let me show you how we honor the past. You follow him to a small island where nothing is planted. It's a memory chinampa. No crops, no compost, just flowers and stones. At the center is a circle of carved basalt surrounded by offerings, feathers, cacao beans, even a fresh tortilla. Some say these are the oldest islands, Toshli whispers, before the canals, before the paddles, before even the ducks. You kneel beside him and add your own offering. A seed from your pocket, one Toshli gave you your first day here. It's small, striped, and utterly mysterious. Quirky detail. Memory chinampas are rarely discussed in formal history, but descendants of chinampa farmers speak of them as sacred ground, part shrine, part history book. No one plants there, but everyone visits. You lie on your back beside the basalt ring, eyes half closed, listening to the buzz of insects and the whisper of reeds in the breeze. It's a silence filled with memory, like the earth is exhaling stories just beneath the surface. As dusk approaches, the community gathers on the largest chinampa for a storytelling circle. The elders take turns sharing legends, one about a duck who tricked the moon into creating tides, another about a farmer who married a spirit made of moss. Children lean on their parents, half asleep. Someone passes around roasted lake fish wrapped in banana leaves. You chew slowly, lulled by the rhythm of words. Mainstream historical fact: storytelling was essential to Aztec culture, preserving agricultural knowledge, myth, and moral lessons across generations. Tales weren't just entertainment, they were survival guides, wrapped in metaphor and mystery. Joke number 3. Because nothing says hero's journey like a frog who turns into a squash. As the last story fades, the stars ignite above the lake. Tockley tosses a handful of maize into the water as a final thank you. Tomorrow, he says, we plant under the blessing of Venus. You nod, unsure what that means but already drowsy. You float back to your hammock, passing silent rows of chinampas under the starlight. Every island glows faintly, as if each one remembers something you don't yet know. Tonight you sleep with the memory of flowers, the lesson of calendars, and the image of a frog in a hat standing guard over a bowl of beans. You might dream of squash warriors or singing compost heaps, or maybe, just maybe, you'll dream in pictographs. Your dreams last night were weird, not unpleasant, just intensely squash-focused. You wake up vaguely remembering a talking chili pepper and a tomato with excellent advice about taxes. Maybe you've been absorbing too much of this chinampa magic, or maybe you're just hungry. Toxley's already up, humming that same off-key tune, but this time he's holding a net and balancing on a raft that looks like a flattened canoe. We're fishing, he says. Sort of. You blink. Sort of? He points to the water beside the chinampa. It's rippling gently, and under the surface, something dark and long moves. Time to meet the axolotl, Toshley grins. Mainstream historical fact: the axolotl, a rare amphibian native to Lake Xochimilco, played a quiet but vital role in Aztec food systems. Unlike other salamanders, axolotls never undergo full metamorphosis, staying in their aquatic gilled form for life. The Aztecs farmed them in the canals, not just for food, but for medicine and religious offerings. Tockley tosses the net and within seconds pulls up a wriggling pair of axolotls, pale pink with feathery gills like underwater fireworks. They blink at you. You blink back. They're sacred, weird little miracles, he says, gently placing them in a woven basket half submerged in the canal. We don't take too many, just enough. Quirky tidbit: some Aztec legends said axolotls were actually the god Solotl in disguise, dodging sacrifice by transforming into a slippery, hard-to-catch creature. Which, honestly, is a mood. You help Toxley paddle along the canal, collecting a few more critters for the evening stew. The water is warm and full of life. Dragonflies skitter, fish dart, and birds skim the surface like sleepy arrows. Then you see it, a floating cage of reeds, swaying slightly. Inside are dozens of tiny fish, some silver, some speckled, all wriggling. Tockley explains, this is aquaculture, fish farming alongside the crops. We keep them fed with lake weeds and compost runoff. Their waste fertilizes the water for plants. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs invented true integrated aquaculture systems or if these arrangements developed organically. Either way, the result was efficient, sustainable, and delicious. Joke number 1. So the fish poop feeds the corn feeds the people, and the people eventually fish again. It's the circle of lunch. Back at the main chinampa, a group of elders is building a new raft, wide, flat, and surprisingly elegant. It's a mobile nursery. They'll float it among the islands, introducing young plants to sun, shade, and the occasional duck attack before transplanting them permanently. You help gather soft mud and lake grasses to fill its shallow trays. It smells like green tea and ambition. Once the raft is ready, Izel brings over dozens of seedlings. Tiny chilies, baby tomato plants, wobbly squash vines. They're placed in tidy rows, each marked with a little reed flag. Toxley leans over one and whispers, "You can do it." You raise an eyebrow. What? Encouragement works. Joke number 2. Studies show plants that receive compliments grow 20% faster, especially if they're called buddy or champ. You float the nursery raft into the canal, giving it a gentle push. It drifts serenely among the older chinampas like a kindergarten class on a field trip. You half expect the seedlings to wave. In the afternoon heat, the canals become busier. Farmers paddle by, singing trading chants. You hear echoes of maize for chilies and tomatoes for beans, like marketplace karaoke. Tokley guides you to a trading point, a wider stretch of canal where farmers gather to barter goods directly from their canoes. There are no stalls, no coin, just quiet conversation and careful weighing of what's fair. Mainstream historical fact: the Aztecs relied heavily on barter, especially for daily exchanges. Chinampa farmers would fresh produce, herbs, and fish for pottery, tools, or specialty foods from drier regions. You watch as a man with a canoe full of avocados swaps 3 baskets of them for a finely crafted obsidian hoe. Another farmer offers smoked fish in exchange for a bundle of medicinal herbs. There's even someone trading cacao nibs for a live duck who seems only mildly concerned. Joke number 3. 1 duck for 5 handfuls of chocolate? That's either a great deal or a very confused dessert. Toxley offers your harvested chilies in return for a jar of thick, fragrant mole paste. The trade is sealed with a nod, a quick prayer, and, curiously, a handshake involving a thumb wiggle. You try it and immediately botch the rhythm. "You'll get it," Tokley says, smirking. As the sun dips low, the colors of the chinampas deepen. Green fields shimmer with bronze, and the water reflects every movement like liquid glass. You pass a woman harvesting water lilies with a curved blade. She smiles, tucks one behind your ear, and paddles on. Then comes the real surprise: a floating market festival. Boats cluster around a central platform lit by small fires in ceramic bowls. Musicians play wooden flutes and clay drums, sending rippling notes across the lake. Vendors float by offering tamales, fermented drinks, flower garlands, and something that smells suspiciously like smoked toad. Quirky detail: Aztec chinampa festivals glamorous with celebration. Markets were social events where news traveled faster than ducks, and alliances were strengthened over maize beer and chili-laced stew. You're handed a steaming cup of pulque, a mildly alcoholic drink made from fermented agave. It tastes like someone sweet-talked a cactus into becoming yogurt. You pretend to enjoy it and politely sip while chewing a spicy maize fritter that makes your ears sweat. Children race canoe games between the floating gardens, shouting the names of their favorite vegetables as battle cries. "Chili! Tomato! I am the Bean King." Tokley's mother spots you from across the platform and throws a handful of flower petals your way. "For luck," she yells. And because you look too serious, you smile, your face sticky with sweat, petals, and what might be mole sauce. Everything smells like firewood and fresh maize. Your skin hums from the music, your mind hums from the pulque, and your heart, well, that's humming too. Tonight, you don't go back to your hammock right away. Instead, you float alone through the moonlit canals, letting the gentle current guide you. The chinampas glow faintly in the starlight like resting giants. You drift past the nursery raft. Those baby plants are still upright, still proud. You pass the memory chinampa, silent and watchful. You pass the compost mound, now cooling under night reeds. And finally, you pass the axolotl cage. One blinks at you again, serene as ever. You whisper, "Don't worry, I'd hide from sacrifice too." The axolotl winks, or maybe it was a water ripple. Either way, you smile and drift home. The sun rises late today like it hit snooze 3 times. You stretch on your hammock, arms stiff from paddling, cheeks still sticky from yesterday's mole festival, and realize something both lovely and terrifying. You're starting to feel like you belong here. Tockley finds you poking the compost pile again. "We have visitors," he says, "from the city." Your brain immediately flashes to something dramatic. Nobles in feathered robes, armed guards, jaguars wearing sunglasses. But no, it's 2 government surveyors wearing modest cloaks and carrying wooden boards etched with pictographs and grids. One of them squints at your dirt-covered face and mumbles, "Scribe in training?" You nod, solemnly. Might as well roll with it. Mainstream historical fact. The Aztec state closely monitored chinampa production. Officials would visit floating farms to collect taxes and produce, assess productivity, and assign labor quotas. The entire empire leaned on the chinampa zones to feed urban populations, especially in Tenochtitlan. Tochley guides them along the canals, answering their questions with all the patience of someone who has done this dozens of times. They measure cornstalks, sample soil, and even sniff a gourd of fermented duck feed. "Efficient," one of them nods. "Also weird." They make detailed notations using colored strings tied to the edge of a wooden panel. It's a recording system you haven't seen before, something between a spreadsheet and macrame. Quirky tidbit, some chinampa communities combined written records in pictographs with tactile markers, knotted strings, etched clay tokens, or floating markers that changed color depending on nutrient levels. These systems were decentralized but surprisingly accurate, especially considering they didn't have Excel or Wi-Fi. The officials leave a few hours later, satisfied. In their wake, the mood shifts. Tockley's family gathers around the fire pit and starts talking about the future. "The wet season is coming early," says one uncle, pointing to cloud patterns. "We need more labor to extend the southern canal." Another nods. "We'll send word to the market at Coyoacan. There's a family of builders looking for land rights." You frown. "Labor for land?" Tockley explains. "It's a trade. You help us expand the chinampa, you get a share of it." That's how most of our neighbors started. Historians still argue whether these arrangements were formal contracts or fluid community traditions. Some chinampa zones followed imperial decree, others operated like little cooperative islands. Joke number 1. Turns out even in ancient times, you couldn't escape group projects. By midday, the plans are underway. You help measure out the new chinampa space using a weighted rope, walking backward while trying not to fall into a canal. Again. The chosen spot lies next to a narrow but fast-moving current. Good circulation, Tockley says, and rich sediment. Construction begins with bundled reed foundations. Everyone works in rhythm, laying reeds, mud, logs, and stakes in a layered cake of agriculture. You haul baskets of soil until your shoulders feel like you bench-pressed a water buffalo. And then, disaster. A shout, a splash, a baby duck flailing. You rush to the edge and see the current has undercut part of the reed wall. The bundle has broken apart, the new chinampa crumbling into muddy soup. Tochley curses under his breath. You're about to panic, but his uncle grabs a long pole and begins wedging new support beams into the canal bottom. "Anchor it," he growls, "like the old ones." Mainstream historical fact. Chinampas were reinforced using vertical stakes, often willow or ahuejote trees that grew roots into the waterbed, creating living anchors. These trees also provided shade, stability, and materials for tools or medicine. You scramble to help, driving fresh willow cuttings into the soft bed with rhythmic thumps. Everyone's soaked, muddy, and barking orders. Even the ducks are yelling. But slowly, the structure holds. Tockley smiles at you, covered in mud from nose to knee. Now you're a real farmer. Joke number 2. Cool. Does this mean I get a raise in imaginary ancient currency? After the crisis, you all collapse under a tarp and share sweetened maize porridge from a communal bowl. It tastes like smoky sunshine and emergency teamwork. Aunt Ezell reaches into her pouch and pulls out something round, black, and surprisingly shiny. You earned this, she says, handing it to you. It's a polished obsidian mirror, the size of your palm. Your reflection stares back, smudged with dirt, hair stuck to your face, eyes alive. To remember, she says. Quirky detail. Small obsidian mirrors were sometimes used in Aztec daily life, not just by priests or sorcerers, but by farmers who believed they helped see the truth of the soil, or possibly just check if you had chili in your teeth. That evening, the community celebrates the rescued chinampa with a quiet meal and a shared prayer to Tlaloc, god of rain and muddy surprises. Everyone places a stone near the new wall, tokens of thanks, protection, and good fortune. Tockley's grandmother sings a soft melody about the islands that float but never leave, and your eyelids grow heavier with each verse. You catch glimpses of tomorrow in the firelight. New crops, new families, more mud. You think of how these people have turned watery chaos into a stable life, plant by plant, pole by pole, one floating miracle at a time. You fall asleep curled beside the reeds, the obsidian mirror cool in your hand. Tonight, your dreams shimmer with polished stone, dancing axolotls, and ducks that high-five you with their wings. You wake to whispers. Not urgent ones, soft, gentle, like cattails brushing together. When you crack open your eyes, you find the chinampa shrouded in fog, water and sky blending into a single ghostly blanket. It's like the lake has exhaled. Tockley crouches nearby, sipping warm amaranth broth. Time to visit the priests, he says, as if it's perfectly normal to announce before breakfast. They want to see the seed offerings. You stare at him. He stares back. Eventually, you mumble, right, obviously, the seed offerings. Mainstream historical fact. Aztec agriculture was deeply spiritual. Priests oversaw seasonal ceremonies where seeds were blessed, rain was requested, and earth gods were appeased. These rituals were often held near chinampa fields, blending sacred and practical life. Tockley hands you a small woven pouch. Inside are the tiniest seeds you've ever seen, millet, chia, and amaranth mostly. There's also a single dried chili and something that might be a pickled cricket leg. For variety, he shrugs. You paddle toward a narrow, winding channel flanked by trees with whispering leaves. The mist makes everything quieter, like sound doesn't want to wake the spirits. Eventually, you reach an island unlike the others. No rows of crops, no ducks, just a small shrine carved from black stone, surrounded by flickering incense bowls and silent watchers in cloaks made of dried maize husks. The priests. One of them nods slowly at you. You bring life to the lake, you fumble with your words. I brought seeds and some compost. I've also fallen into the water 6 times, which feels spiritual. They chuckle. You're not sure if that's good. Quirky tidbit. Some chinampa priests believed that offering seeds still clinging to last season's roots made the earth spirits more receptive, like showing a before and after pic to your compost god. Tockley kneels beside you and empties his pouch into a shallow stone bowl. You do the same. The seeds make a satisfying rustle, like applause in miniature. One priest scatters the seeds into the water, chanting softly, Another presses muddy fingers to your forehead and murmurs a blessing that feels like both a thank you and a warning. As you leave the shrine, you feel lighter, or maybe that's just the broth finally kicking in. Joke number 1, spiritual enlightenment, 4.5 stars on Yelp, would fall into sacred mud again. Back on the chinampa, the day turns golden. You find the memory chinampa again, the plot dedicated to past loved ones. This time, a new offering has been added. A small flute carved from bone nestled beside a cracked clay cup. Tockley notices you staring. "My grandfather," he says. "He built the canal over there." He gestures toward a gentle curve in the water. You hadn't realized it wasn't natural. He used to say every farmer should build one thing that outlives them. A canal, a tree, a recipe. You nod, try not to get misty-eyed over a dead man's irrigation system. Later, you help Tockley harvest amaranth. The stalks are tall and rust-colored, with seed heads that look like feathery fireworks. Each one holds thousands of tiny grains, nutritious, resilient, and sacred. Mainstream historical fact: amaranth was one of the most important crops in the Aztec diet. It was high in protein and used in religious ceremonies, where it was often mixed with honey and shaped into figures of gods, then broken and eaten in symbolic communion. You gather the seeds into woven baskets, while ducks circle your feet, hoping for snacks. One bold duck actually tries to peck your shoelace, which you didn't know you had. Tockley tosses them a handful of leftover millet. "Distraction feed," he winks. You work in peaceful rhythm for hours. Harvest, sift, laugh, repeat. There's music in the routine, the kind that sneaks up on you. Your hands learn before your mind catches up. Joke number 2. You know you're adjusting to Aztec life when seed sorting feels more meditative than your yoga app. As the sun begins to dip, you all sit by the canal and begin the toasting ritual. Not a religious one, just a culinary one. Tockley's mother roasts amaranth on a clay griddle, stirring constantly until the seeds pop like tiny firecrackers. The smell is nutty and warm with a hint of something sweet. She mixes it with a little honey and presses it into rough squares. You bite into one. It's like a granola bar's ancient ancestor, delicious and just a little gritty. Quirky detail: these popped amaranth bars, called alegría by the Spanish later, were eaten during festivals and as high-energy field snacks. They were especially popular among chinampa laborers and warriors. You lie back, munching your amaranth, watching the sky change from gold to lavender. Tockley says, "This lake used to be deeper, bigger. My grandfather said it reached beyond where the temples are now." Historians still argue whether the lakes shrank mainly from overuse, redirected water systems, or climate shifts. But what's certain is that chinampas held on longer than anyone expected, some even surviving the fall of the empire. Joke number 3. The Spanish came for the gold, stayed for the salad. You paddle slowly back through the misty canal. At one bend, you see a boy standing on a tiny raft, releasing flowers into the water. A tribute? A wish? You don't ask. The moon appears, fat and serene. Your raft cuts through its reflection, sending silvery ripples outward. You've never felt more suspended between worlds. The priest's muddy fingerprint still smudges your forehead. Your pouch still smells like toasted seeds. You don't know what tomorrow brings, but tonight you feel held, like the lake itself has wrapped you in a blanket. You reach your hammock, collapse with a sigh, and exhale into the darkness. The night air smells of amaranth and smoke, and somewhere in the distance, a flute plays a song that might be for the god of the rain, or maybe just for you. It's early. The sky barely glows with the promise of dawn, but your eyes snap open at the sound of shuffling feet, hushed voices, and music. Not the soft reed flutes you've grown used to. This is louder, sharper, Rhythmic drum beats echo across the water, matched by the hiss of fire and clatter of something metallic. You scramble out of your hammock, your feet still sticky with yesterday's lake mud, and find Tockley already dressed in ceremonial clothes. Bright red sash, painted cheeks, hair slicked back. "We're going to the market," he says, like it's just another casual trip to pick up avocados. "Why do you look like you're auditioning for an Aztec boy band?" you mutter. He smirks. "Because today's not just any market day. It's Great Market Day." Mainstream historical fact: the Aztecs held major market days every 5 days in a rotating calendar system. But once every 20-day cycle, there was a mega market, drawing thousands from all over the region. The most famous was at Tlatelolco, but even lake communities like Xochimilco had their grand exchange days. You get dressed in your best mud-free outfit and climb into the canoe with Tockley and his cousins. The journey takes longer than usual, the canals buzzing with traffic, rafts stacked with squash, crates of frogs, baskets of feathers, bundles of reeds. You pass chinampa after chinampa now bustling with last-minute harvesters. Even the ducks seem excited. As the canal opens into a large lagoon, the market reveals itself. It's not a square or a street. It's a floating bazaar. Hundreds of rafts tethered together, forming walkways and clusters. There's shouting, singing, the tang of roasted corn, the earthy scent of clay pots, and the unmistakable screech of a parrot trying to haggle. Joke number 1. Nothing says civilization like a bird yelling about discount avocados. You dock your canoe and step carefully onto a makeshift raft bridge, heart racing. It's like the Super Bowl, Comic-Con, and a duck petting zoo all rolled into one. Tockley's family splits up. Some to sell, some to trade, some to wander. You follow Tockley toward the seed circle, where agricultural families trade starter packs, maize cobs, chile varieties, mystery beans that could be medicinal or mildly cursed. You spot a table, raft, displaying glowing blue mushrooms under a woven canopy. A wrinkled woman with no teeth grins at you. "Fungus of wisdom," she says. You nod respectfully and back away. Quirky tidbit: some Aztec markets included vendors offering not just food and crafts, but dreams, omens, and semi-mythical remedies, including mushrooms, toads, or spirit dust that may or may not have contained actual magic. Tockley picks out a new strain of maize, a compact ear with deep red kernels. Drought-resistant, the vendor explains, but stubborn. You have to talk to it nicely when you plant it. You decide not to ask if that's scientifically verified. As you walk through the meat section, yes, on water, you spot skinned fish arranged like flower petals, dried lizards tied into funny shapes, and, surprise, a full roasted axolotl. You blink. It winks. You choose instead to buy tamales. Safer. Mainstream historical fact: Aztec markets were intensely regulated. Officials patrolled to prevent fraud, settle disputes, and inspect goods. Cheating could result in public shaming, or worse, forced performances where you reenacted your crime using puppets. You pass by a mock court where a man dressed as a jaguar pretends to eat a dishonest merchant made of corn dough. The crowd roars with laughter. Justice served. Snack style. Tockley finds you gawking and hands you a carved obsidian bead. "From the weavers section," he says, "a charm for not losing your mind in crowds." You nod, gripping it like a security blanket. Next, you visit the trade raft, where things get serious. Farmers barter directly with distant merchants, obsidian blades for salt, woven mats for cacao beans, dried chilies for firewood bundles. You even witness a chinampa lease being signed, 2 farmers using chalk to mark a log with symbols. When they finish, they kiss the log and throw a single maize kernel into the water. Historians still argue whether these kinds of deals were binding legal contracts or more symbolic agreements upheld by community tradition. Either way, there was a deep sense of honor behind the gestures. Joke number 2. Imagine if your mortgage depended on kissing a log and tossing a cornflake in a pond. Later, you rest beneath a palm canopy, sipping fermented agave drink with a hint of lime and something smoky? You stop asking. Toshli teaches you how to read chinampa market glyphs, drawings of plants, weights, and animals etched into wooden tags. One shows a frog holding a bell. That means it's overpriced, he whispers. Quirky detail. Chinampa merchants sometimes used humorous symbols to encode product quality, like drawing a duck with a crooked foot to signal tough meat, or a sunburst over beans to say they were dried under good light. The day ends in music, drums, flutes, and a circle dance on the largest platform. Toshli grabs your arm. Everyone dances, he says, even terrified fake scribes from the future. You join. Feet stumble, laughter bubbles, the raft shifts with every beat. It's chaotic, sweaty, and more fun than you expected. By nightfall, the lagoon glows with firelight from floating lanterns, each tethered to a raft, each flickering like a star, fallen just far enough to be useful. You lean back on a sack of traded maize, heart full, stomach fuller. And for one perfect moment, you understand why the Aztecs fought to protect this world. Why chinampa farmers defended canals with pitchforks. Why the priests blessed seeds with such care. This isn't just agriculture. It's a floating symphony of survival, spirit, and surprisingly judgmental parrots. You drift off to sleep in the canoe, your obsidian bead warm in your hand, the water cradling you like an old friend. When you wake, your face is stuck to a woven maize sack and your neck sounds like a basket being stepped on. You groan, peel yourself upright, and squint at the sky. It's a delicate gray like wet clay before it dries. Toshli yawns beside you. Ready for Chinampa Maintenance Day? You blink. I thought we just had a market festival. Yes, he grins, which means now the real work begins. Welcome to the Aztec concept of balance. Feast, then sweat. Trade, then toil. Your reward for a day of joyful chaos? A day of floating construction. Yay. Mainstream historical fact, chinampas required constant upkeep. Without maintenance, they would erode, collapse into the lake, or become overgrown. Farmers used layered techniques of dredging mud, weaving plant roots, and reshaping beds to keep the system productive year-round. Today's task is reinforcing one of the older plots, which has started to sag on one end like a bad mattress. You and Toshli hop into the canoe, armed with a shovel, a long rake, and something called a tlashinoli, a split-handled digging tool that looks suspiciously like an angry salad fork. He points at the edge of the chinampa, where the lake has started to nibble away the corner. We'll need fresh mud, reedbills, and willow poles. Willow poles. Simple enough. 2 hours later, you're hip-deep in sticky lake muck, covered in mosquito bites, and one reed bundle has tried to drown you. So far, so good. Joke number 1. You haven't known true despair until a lily pad laughs at you. As you wrestle with the mud, you notice something buried in the silt. You dig around it and pull free a small stone carving, a face with wide eyes and a crooked smile. Toshli peers at it. A tlalochito, little rain god. People used to bury them in the foundations for good luck. Quirky tidbit. It was common for Aztec farmers to embed tiny stone or clay figurines in their chinampas, miniature gods, animals, or human faces, to spiritually reinforce the structure. Some were inherited talismans passed down for generations. You rinse it gently and place it on the edge of the bed. He looks concerned, you say, probably about my posture. The rebuilding begins with layering. First, you pile fresh lake sediment, thick, black, worm-filled mud, into baskets and dump it where the land's eroded. Then you weave reeds into rough mats and wedge them into place to hold the shape. Then come the willow poles. Toshli explains, we drive them deep into the lake bed. The roots grow, intertwine, and anchor the chinampa from underneath. You help him pound one into place with a heavy stone. It's satisfying in a primal building civilization with tree sticks kind of way. Mainstream historical fact: willows were critical to chinampa construction. Their fast-growing roots stabilized the soil and their shade protected tender crops. Over time, a network of willows could turn a floating garden into a nearly permanent island. You pause for lunch, tortillas with squash blossom and smoked fish, and stare out at your work. It still looks like a soggy mess, but Tockley nods approvingly. "You've got the mud touch," he says. "I'm going to put that on my resume." In the afternoon, the focus shifts to the canals themselves. You and a crew paddle through narrow water corridors, dredging out silt and aquatic plants. Tockley shows you how to use a long wooden net to scoop out floating algae mats, which smell like wet socks and sadness. "These make great mulch, though," he says, heaping it into a canoe. Joke number 2. Aztec spa day, exfoliate with lake gunk, moisturize with compost. Along one canal, you spot a line of floating gourds tied together with reeds. They sway in the current like bobbing watermelons. "Canal marker," says Tockley. "That tells people where not to go. It's soft sediment over there." Historians still argue whether some canal layouts followed sacred geometry, aligning with stars, cardinal directions, or the movements of Venus. Others believe the patterns were purely functional, designed for optimal flow and access. Likely, it was both. As you navigate further, you find a narrow causeway, a stone path that runs through the lake. Farmers walk it with baskets on their heads, balancing like tightrope artists. Quirky detail: the Aztecs built raised causeways and underwater footpaths across their lakes, often lining them with stone and using volcanic gravel to resist erosion. Some even had built-in sluice gates to control water levels. You try walking one. 3 steps in, your sandal gets stuck and a duck laughs at you. This feels personal. Back at the Chinampa, you and Tockley begin final touches, planting quick-rooting grass along the new edge to keep it compact and sprinkling ground chili powder to deter ants. The scent is oddly comforting. He places the tlaloquito near a young maize stalk and pats its tiny stone head. He'll keep watch. As dusk creeps in, the whole family gathers to admire the repaired plot. It's squarer now, firmer, and slightly elevated, just enough to keep it from drowning in a storm. You lie back on the grass, sore and filthy and wildly content. Joke number 3. They say to touch grass when you're stressed. I say build a whole floating island and cry into a squash. The wind rustles the maize. Somewhere a child laughs. A frog croaks as if to say, "Good job, mudhuman." You don't have to ask anymore how these places survived for centuries. You feel it in your bones, how something constantly tended can outlast almost anything, how a handful of lake mud, some woven reeds, and stubborn care can build an empire. Your hands are blistered, your skin smells of algae, but you can't stop smiling. You've helped hold the land in place. And tonight, as the stars bloom above you like pale blossoms, you know the gods, or at least the grumpy little Tlalocito, are probably a little impressed. Your arms still ache from yesterday's Chinampa repairs, but you barely notice because today the lake is whispering. Not just wind whistling through reeds whispering, but something stranger, quieter, older, a kind of watery hum that makes the fine hairs on your neck stand up. You ask Tockley about it. Today's the day of the Huitzot, he says, eyes wide with mischief, or fear, you can't quite tell. Bless you, you reply. He doesn't laugh. You should wear this. He hands you a necklace made of turtle shell chips and obsidian flakes for protection. Mainstream historical fact: Aztec folklore was full of water spirits and mythical creatures, especially around the lakes and canals. Among them was the Ahuitzotl, a terrifying water beast said to drag careless people beneath the surface. You gulp. According to Tochley, the Ahuitzotl lives near the deepest parts of the lake, usually under thick patches of lily and tangled watercress. It's said to be the size of a dog but far sneakier, with sleek fur, razor claws, and a long tail with a human-like hand at the tip. Charming. They say it pretends to be a crying baby, he whispers. You lean over to help, and it yanks you into the water. Then only your eyes, teeth, and nails float back. Lovely. You decide to stay on land today, or at least on solid chinampa. But the elders insist that stories like this aren't just for scaring children. The lakes were dangerous, deep, shifting, full of whirlpools and thin patches of reed mat where the wrong step could mean a watery end. Stories of monsters taught people caution. Historians still argue whether these tales reflect metaphor, ecological memory, or literal belief. Some even suggest the Ahuitzotl was inspired by actual animals like otters, clever, aggressive, and, surprisingly, human in their habits. Quirky tidbit. Spanish chroniclers reported that Aztec priests believed the Ahuitzotl was a sacred creature of the rain god Tlaloc, and victims taken by it were considered chosen. Their bodies were handled with great reverence, eyes, teeth, and nails missing or not. Tochley leads you through the shallows where the water is clearer, but still full of shadows. You both carry long poles, not for walking, but for stirring the water ahead. Just in case. We'll just check on the water traps, he says. No deep diving today. Great. You love any activity that requires ghost-repellent jewelry. As you paddle, he tells you more lake legends. There's the Alux, a tiny spirit that lives in dragonfly nests and swaps your fishing nets with frogs. And the Xolotl lantern, a glowing dog-shaped flame that leads people astray at night. Joke number 1. Between the monsters and the mosquitoes, it's amazing anyone lived long enough to invent floating farms. You finally reach a reed enclosure tucked between two chinampas, a simple fish trap made with curved fencing and floating gourds. Tochley peeks in. Tilapia again, he says. Not bad. You help scoop the wriggling fish into baskets, trying not to scream every time one flops near your foot. You're about to head back when something strange happens. The water goes still, unnaturally still. The birds stop. Even the bugs hush. And then a splash, not your usual fishy splatter. This one sounds heavy, intentional. You both freeze. Tochley raises a brow. Could be a turtle, could be a screaming lake demon, you suggest helpfully. He signals for silence and paddles closer to a patch of thick lilies. You brace yourself, heart racing, hand on your pole like it's a magic wand. Another splash, closer now, and then a blur. You scream, he yells. The canoe wobbles, and a very, very fat otter bounces up out of the water, landing with a slap across the front of the boat. It stares at you with what can only be described as smug disdain, then sneezes, wiggles its tail, and slides back into the lake. Tochley laughs so hard he nearly tips the canoe. Joke number 2. So that's the hand-tailed monster. Otters, nature's practical jokers. You glare at him. That's not funny. I almost died. You almost died of embarrassment, he says, still chuckling, which, to be fair, happens often. Back on shore, the elders nod when you describe what you saw. Ah, says one, the spirit warned you to be humble. Another adds, next time bring an offering, maybe chocolate. And then they laugh too. But the stories linger. That night, the village gathers around a fire on a central chinampa. Not a festival, just storytelling. The stars above are soft and hazy. The fire crackles. You eat roasted maize and tamarind, warm and sticky. One elder tells of a night when the lake rose and moved, not from rain, but because it was alive. Another speaks of a boat that left for market and never returned, its oars later found woven into a tree trunk. You're still shaking off the otter trauma, but somehow this feels right. Not all stories need to be true to be meaningful. They warn, they teach, they anchor, just like the willow poles. Toxley leans over and hands you a new necklace. This one has a tiny jade frog hanging from it. For balance, he says. You thank him, pressing it between your fingers. The fire dims. People drift to hammocks. But you stay a little longer, watching the stars reflect on the black lake water, shimmering gently like something waiting to speak. Mainstream historical fact. Even modern-day remnants of the chinampas system retain folk rituals and stories. Though many have faded, some families still pass down oral histories of water spirits, sacred animals, and talking mud from the old canals. The line between belief and ecology, between myth and memory, it blurs on nights like this. And maybe that's okay. After all, floating worlds are built as much on stories as on soil. You tuck your frog necklace beneath your tunic, whisper goodnight to the lake, and climb into your hammock. The water laps against the chinampa's edge like a slow heartbeat. And somewhere, a smug otter laughs. You wake before sunrise, not because you're eager, but because a duck is standing on your chest. It stares down at you with the bored expression of a creature that has seen too much. It honks. Once. Toxley appears beside your hammock, clearly enjoying this. That's Mazatzin. He likes you. He's standing on my sternum, you mutter. He's very affectionate. You sit up, dislodging the duck, and rub your eyes. The sky is barely light, and mist curls across the lake like it's trying to whisper secrets. Today, Toxley says, you're going to see the sacred mountain. You raise an eyebrow. We're rowing all the way to the volcano? Nope, he says, handing you a canteen. We're rowing halfway, then hiking. Bring your legs. Mainstream historical fact. The Aztecs revered mountains, especially volcanoes like Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl, as sacred beings. They believed these peaks were not only homes of the gods, but literal water storage containers, holding rain and fog to feed the lakes below. The canoe glides smoothly as the sun rises in gold and orange streaks. You pass through a network of narrow canals past early rising farmers, priests in white cotton robes, and kids tossing maize tortillas to coaties. Eventually, the water gives way to soggy trail and then to stone paths winding upward. The change is almost spiritual. Lush chinampas and still water replaced by pine trees, hummingbirds, and that strange, high-altitude silence. Toxley stops beside a small shrine built into the rocks, a crude sculpture of a mountain spirit, half man, half hawk, perches above a pile of offerings, feathers, obsidian chips, and ears of corn. We call him Tepeotl, he says, heart of the mountain. Quirky tidbit. Tepeotl, the jaguar god of echoes, caves, and earthquakes, was believed to live deep within sacred mountains. Some believed he roared before storms, while others whispered that he slept inside volcanoes, dreaming in magma. You offer a small tortilla with honey. It's the only thing you had left in your pouch. Do gods accept breakfast snacks? Toxley shrugs, if they're delicious. The trail narrows, and soon you reach a high overlook. The view steals your breath more effectively than the altitude. Below you spreads a spider web of chinampas, glittering in the sun. Water glints between narrow rows of crops. Smoke curls from cooking fires. Canoes trail wakes like silver threads across a woven quilt. Joke number 1, from up here it looks like someone spilled a salad onto a mirror. Toxley sits beside you. This is why the gods still listen, he says. They see what we've made. They see how we feed the people, how we honor the lake. You nod. For once, no joke comes to mind. Mainstream historical fact. Aztec priests often made pilgrimages to sacred peaks to perform rituals that ensured water for crops. These rites blended astronomy, agriculture, and theology into one inseparable practice. Rain didn't just fall. It had to be asked for, danced for, honored. He pulls out a pouch and scatters a few cacao beans into the wind. They bounce off a rock and fall toward the valley below. You raise an eyebrow. That doesn't seem efficient. They go where they're needed. Historians still argue whether these mountaintop rituals were symbolic or functional. Did they believe spirits lived there, or were the rituals more about controlling social and environmental forces through shared myth? The answer, as usual, is likely yes. Toshli points toward a glimmer in the far distance. There. See that bend in the canal? That's the oldest chinampa. My family has farmed it since the ancestors wore feathers instead of shirts. You grin. That explains your fashion sense. He throws a pine cone at you. After resting and sharing a chewy maize cake and a few roasted beans, you begin the descent. Your knees crack like firewood, and the duck from this morning follows you the entire way, waddling with stubborn pride. Back in the canoe, your muscles ache, but your mind buzzes. The mountain was more than just tall rocks. It was a reminder. Everything here, floating farms, fish traps, city markets, depends on the quiet bond between sky and earth, between mist and maze. Toshli steers you toward home, taking the long way so you can see the canals one last time in the soft afternoon light. You pass old women fishing from shaded porches, young boys racing herons across the water, and willows whose roots look like tangled braids of a sleeping god's hair. The chinampas are alive. You can feel it now, not as a metaphor, but as something humming beneath the soil, each one a pulse in a larger heartbeat. You helped rebuild one just days ago, and already it's part of this living map. Joke number 2. If you can't find a good apartment, just grow one on a lake. Back at Toshli's family plot, you help tie up bundles of harvested amaranth and check for any pests nibbling the squash flowers. Even the smallest tasks feel more sacred now. An elder stops by to offer thanks for your help with the chinampa repairs, for surviving the ahutzotl, and for not ruining too many tortillas. You're still clumsy, she says kindly, but less useless. High praise. You nod, bow, and nearly trip over a basket. Quirky detail. In some villages, newly initiated workers would receive playful nicknames based on their most embarrassing mistake. One famous chinapero was called Xochicoatl, or flower snake, because he once slipped on marigolds and landed in a canoe full of eels. You'll be remembered, no doubt, possibly as muddy otter bait. Could be worse. As evening falls, a soft breeze ripples across the lake. You sit by the maze, watching the dragonflies dance and the shadows stretch like slow-moving ink. Toshli offers you a tiny clay flute shaped like a frog. It's how you call rain, he says, or how you annoy your neighbors, same sound. You blow into it. It squeaks. A duck honks back, and for a moment, everything feels just right. The stars are just beginning to peek through the fading indigo sky, scattered like seeds flung by a lazy god across a dark blanket. You're sitting on the edge of a chinampa now, legs dangling just above the cool lake water. Your clothes smell like ash and marigold, and your hands are still stained with soil and squash sap. The last festival candles flicker on distant rafts, their flames swaying like fireflies trying to remember how to dance. You're not from here, not really, but something in your ribs tells you that you will carry this place with you for a long time, maybe forever. Toshli sits beside you, slurping on a cup of pulque through a carved reed straw. He offers you a sip. You decline. You're still recovering from the last time when you accidentally insulted 3 elders and mistook a beetle for a date. He chuckles and leans back. Tomorrow, I'll teach you how to plant chili peppers without setting your own eyebrows on fire. Looking forward to it, you lie. Mainstream historical fact, chili peppers were an essential part of the Aztec diet and culture. They weren't just for flavor. Chili smoke was used in purification rituals, punishments, and even warfare. Yes, even their spicy air had a job to do. You watch as a canoe drifts past, lit only by a tiny torch. A child lies on its belly, staring into the water, trying to catch glimpses of the moon's reflection. The night is quiet, but not silent. Frogs croak, reeds rustle, and the lake hums its slow, ancient lullaby. You think of everything you've done here. Built a chinampa from the bones of a swamp, wrestled a compost pit and almost lost, fell for a duck, faced an otter demon, and more importantly, listened. Learned. Absorbed the rhythm of a world that floats and breathes and remembers. You lean back and feel the slight rocking of the earth beneath you. Not a trick of your mind. Not magic. The chinampas move. Only a little, only when the wind catches just right, but they move. They breathe. Quirky tidbit. Some chinampros believed their plots had personalities. Some stubborn, some generous, some lazy. They spoke to them before planting, offered songs to the soil, and even left little gifts, flowers, feathers, drops of honey. Tockley taps his fingers on the wood. They say if you plant while telling a joke, the crops grow sweeter. You nod. That explains the sour amaranth patch near your grandmother's hut. He doesn't laugh. He's smiling too softly for that. He points out toward the lake. See the center? That's where they say the first chinampa was born. Right there, under the stars, a bundle of mud and cane tied together by someone who was too stubborn to drown. You both sit there for a long time, just watching the stars ripple on the surface. Historians still argue whether the chinampa system can be revived fully in modern times. Pollution, urban sprawl, and drainage have stolen much of what was once a green empire floating on water. But in places like Xochimilco, fragments remain, still farmed, still feeding, still remembering. The lake's breath cools your face. You lie back and look at the heavens, which feel unusually close tonight. And just when your eyes begin to flutter shut, another whisper. Not from the lake this time, but from your own memory. You remember the mud under your fingernails. You remember the old man laughing when you fell into a pile of reeds. You remember the smell of freshly grilled fish and epazote. You remember the feeling of belonging to something ancient, not by blood, but by effort, sweat, curiosity. Tockley lies beside you now, arms folded behind his head, humming a song you don't recognize. Something old, something passed down. It has no words, just wind, just water. Joke number 1. I came here to see a floating garden and accidentally joined an empire. You close your eyes and everything floats. Now the story grows quiet and the chinampas grow still. The night deepens and the lake hushes beneath a soft cloak of stars. Even the frogs seem to pause between their croaks, as if listening to something very far away. Maybe a memory, maybe a dream. Your body is heavy now, as if made of smooth volcanic stone, the kind used to grind maize into masa. Your breath slows, in rhythm with the gentle lapping of the water. A steady rhythm, familiar, safe. Around you, the world fades into silhouettes, canoes gliding like shadows, trees leaning like sleeping giants, smoke curling from the last embers of a cooking fire. Even the air has softened. It moves gently across your cheeks as if to say, rest now, you've done enough. The chinampa beneath you holds firm, cradling you with its woven roots and floating soul. You are no longer a visitor, you are part of it now. A thread in the braid, a whisper in the marsh. The gods are quiet tonight, and that's when you know they're listening. So let go. Let the lake rock you gently like the cradle of the world itself. Let your thoughts drift like lotus petals into the dark. And if you feel the tug of sleep's current, don't resist. Let it carry you. You're safe here. You're home. End of script. Sweet dreams.